Satyam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. Pakistan will be much more careful in future. Now they know they can hit back.
You've also mentioned a few times that we are one election away from chaos.
Voter lists, unquestionably, they're flawed. I mean, if I spend 30 crores in a poor country for an assembly election, and then you expect me to be honest in the next 5 years and serve the cause of the public, I mean, you ought to have your head examined. The party is asking for power over you. Democracy is here at the grassroots. Under no circumstances can violence be justified in a democratic society. There are no ifs and there are no buts. A lot of things are grey. It's not clearly right and wrong. America never understood because America still is a young country, not yet a mature country. You know, it's just, remember, just 300 years old. Now, we cannot defeat China. Probably America also cannot defeat China. The world is not getting messed up. The world is not getting destroyed. The world is not getting more violent. The world is not becoming more exploitative or more heinous. No, not true at all. They're not enough. We deserve more. We need more.
Yeah, here at FDR, we live, breathe, and sleep policy. So one thing that really shocked me this year was how Indigo could literally strong-arm the government. I mean, more than 5,000 flights cancelled, 10,000 people affected, and yet Indigo gets away. How did this happen? Navya, what shocked you?
I think the Supreme Court judgment on stray dogs, while there are lakhs of pending cases already. Hey, Pallavi, what shocked you? What policy shocked you this year?
Nepal's PM being elected on Discord, I think, was a pretty shocking one.
Yeah.
Oh, Aditya.
Hi.
Hey, we were just talking about what policy shocked us the most this year. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I think I never thought social media could be banned.
Yeah.
But lo and behold, Australia did it.
Yeah.
So the social media ban in Australia was shocking. So now that we've talked about our shocking bit, let's sit with Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan to try and understand what actually happened in 2025 in the policy space.
By the time we started, I was just curious about something. Have you climbed a tree?
Oh, yes, of course.
I'm guessing
I
like...
remember in my Loyola College days, +2, you know, did that. I was between 13 and 15 at that time. Neredu. What is the English word for neredu? So I climbed up the tree. The principal, I think, or vice principal, Father Kadu, I think, he saw me. We were not supposed to climb the trees. So he was standing below. He said, "You're up the tree." And I promptly said, "Father, do you want some fruit?" So, ఇంకేం చేస్తున్నారా మొదలెట్టొచ్చా?
Hello, sir.
Hello, Aditya.
Sir, this is something that we did last year, something we did the year before that as well, the year-around wrap-up of the policy space, right? And I would like to bring, start the discussion, from the last year's discussion as well. We talked about volatility in the democratic framework and all of those things. The first question that I want to ask you is not policy specific. I want to ask you whether chaos or volatility are these central features of democracy. Can you never sort of let go of them?
Not necessarily. Though they tend to be a little more volatile than authoritarian systems. If you see the period between 1945 and let's say about 2010 or thereabout, it was a remarkably stable period in democracies. Economic growth, social harmony, political stability, and policy continuity, they were the hallmark. Though, of course, in the 1980s, because of Thatcher and Reagan revolution, there was a significant rupture of policy. But if you take the totality of the picture, there was no great volatility. So where democracies are more prone to it, because you have to reconcile conflicting interests, a variety of groups, and you have to always seek the favor of the voters. Sometimes voters may not look at the long term. But it's not necessary that they have to be volatile. It depends on the consensus in the society, the quality of leadership, and of course the nature of political process.
Right. So, like you rightfully mentioned, sir, the conflicting interests of different groups. Do you think the turbulence attached to that could have something to do with one man, namely the President of the United States? Like, do you think the distortion of the American dream is somehow contributing to this entire thing?
I don't know how much of turbulence is causing in America, but he certainly is causing global turbulence. If Trump's desire is, it seems to be the case, in part, to be the center of everything. He certainly is the center stage of the universe right now. My own view is that the global volatility and turbulence on account of Trump's policies, both in the short term and the long term, are far greater and far graver than perhaps his impact on domestic policy. I'm sure it has some impact on domestic policy also. That probably can be set right by another administration. After all, policies can change. But the global architecture, which is now being sort of unwound because of Trumpian approach, for instance, there's nothing like global cooperation. WTO is not necessarily a dead letter, but it's pretty very close to being moribund and inconsequential. The trust among allies and like-minded countries embracing similar democratic system, for instance, freedom, human rights, that trust is probably lost for a long, long time, if not forever. So the consequences globally are perhaps far graver than locally.
So since we spoke about Trump, one of his administration's most recent initiatives was to bring out the national security strategy. So I want to ask you two questions on that. The first is that this policy states that the US will no longer emphasize democracy building. So local cultures will determine whether democracy is an appropriate government form or not. Your take on this?
To be fair, many scholars argued that should be the case for a long time. For two reasons. One, you cannot impose your system on some other societies for their people. That's what the UN Charter is about. That's what national sovereignty is about. And two, American notion of democracy building has been very naive. Take Afghanistan or Iraq, they invaded, post 9/11. Their notion is you create a good constitution, you give them some money, and then you hold elections, and lo and behold, everything is fine. They never looked at the institutions, the culture, the history, the society's ability to absorb it, and they didn't realize that organically they should go well. There are some universal principles of building democracy. The particulars must be organic, culture specific, local. And unless the people are involved, that one kind of a constitution, one kind of a governance structure, and elections, everything is okay, is a very facile notion. Take India. We have done a great job, in my opinion. We are one of the few countries in the post-colonial history in building a democracy, sustain freedoms, stability, and peaceful transfer of power, and federalism, and reconciling the conflicts in terms of linguistic reorganization, and in terms of religion and faith and caste. We have done a remarkable job. But despite that, we have not really built institutions necessary to make democracy work as well as it should, like the failure of local governance, the failure of rule of law, and of course the socialist policies that further strengthen the state apparatus, its power. So unless you actually look at your own society, your own culture, one shoe fits all will not work. And second, democracy is not something that happens because you give a vote and you give the right to shout. It happens because you create a culture of discussion, consensus, even as dissent is allowed and taken into account, and a reconciliation harmoniously. And the change of a government is not a revolution in a democracy. In a sensible democracy, change of a government is not a revolution. Trump, actually, one of his failings is he thinks an electoral verdict is a revolution. And that's one of the key reasons why there's so much volatility there. But that apart. So if America now says, we're not here to tell you how to run your government or how to run your country, it may not be a bad thing. But if America withdraws from the notion of broad understanding of human rights and liberty, that may not be a very good thing.
So this other key strand that one finds in the document is the idea of civilizational erasure in Europe. So what do you make of that?
It's ahistoric. Truthfully, while we all have our own grouses, we all have our complaints about Europe because after all they colonized all of us. And we all love to bash Europe, right? And, but if you get out of that, to be fair, in the past, I would say about 300 years at the very least, probably 500 years more accurately, but at least 300 years. Europe has been the bastion of modernity, from industrial revolution, technology, science, to notions of human rights, secularism. Europe has been at the pinnacle. They are not perfect. Nobody is perfect. But almost everything that Europe has attempted in the last 100, 200 years is what is the aspiration in most parts of the world. And within Europe, again, we say Northern Europe. Again, nothing is perfect. Every society has its own fissures, its own fractures, its own problems. But we all treat that as the pinnacle of civilization in terms of ideas, in terms of thinking. I'm just now reading a book, The Big History, written by a Welshman, a person of Welsh origin, also American origin, mixed parentage, but spent a substantial period of his time in Australia and Europe. And it is a grand vision of humanity, our history. It's not about empires, it's not about races, it's not about conquest. It's about more or less the evolution of human species and human society and where we are and where we ought to be. So any culture, any civilization that gave that universal notion of humanity, if you say it is erasure of civilization, either we don't understand the meaning of civilization or we don't understand the meaning of erasure.
Yeah. So keeping in line with the topic of instability, this year recently we saw youth-led protests in Indonesia and Madagascar, but also bringing this topic of chaos closer to home, to the Indian subcontinent. In Sri Lanka, there were youth-led protests, and last year also in Bangladesh, there were protests and uprisings. But this year specifically, Nepal had a Gen Z driven protest which started with a social media ban, but it reflected deeper economic and political frustrations. But what mattered was all of these were youth led uprisings. And so there was a certain sort of fragility in the South Asian democracies. And as you said, that India is better, it has sustained stability in some sense. But, sir, so the picture is not as grim. But what actually works for Indian democracy?
Well, it's impossible to categorically state these are the factors, but let's look at three significant differences between India and those countries. In many ways, probably we are in the same boat, but there are three significant differences. The first is, if there is a certain leadership which is broadly trusted and accepted, is respected as legitimate, then it's more likely that you are stable, even if there are some policy differences. Bangladesh and Nepal, essentially it was a complete failure of trust in the leadership. It may not be true about Indonesia, but Sri Lanka also the same thing. Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, complete failure. There's no trust at all. Election or no election, we don't believe you, we don't trust you. The second is the nature of the political process. Whatever be our distortions, and there are distortions in our polity. We all know about money, power, and politics. Living in Telangana, around in Hyderabad city, even if you are now in these beautiful sylvan surroundings, the idea of money, power, and politics is not far from our mind. And even villages, panchayat elections in Telangana recently held, we all know roughly what happened. But despite that, there is a pretty high level of confidence about the integrity of election process, about acceptance of the verdicts, and peaceful transfer of power. Again, all three countries, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, that confidence they could not engender. The third one, perhaps the most important one, if power is only at one level, almost all these, I'm not too sure about Indonesia's structure, but others are all unitary structures. Now here, once you have various tiers of government with real power, real jurisdictional division, then there is no one focus of your protest or anger or hatred. We are all unhappy with our governments. Today, for instance, this morning, I don't know if you guys saw, when I saw the newspaper headlines, one of the newspapers, that the Metropolitan Water Supply and Sewerage Board's vehicle dumped the sewage in Gandipet Lake, which is a drinking water lake. I was angry. In fact, I'm not able to get over that image even now. That sewage is willfully dumped into drinking water lake for Hyderabad city, and you're all drinking that water. We're all drinking that water. So why will I not get angry? But this anger is not against one focus of authority in Delhi. So once we have some degree of federalization, it again becomes much more difficult to topple a whole system of government or a government itself. I think these are the three things which are working in our favor. But we should not be very sanguine about it. Because our third tier local governments are extraordinarily weak, among the weakest in the world. And therefore, ultimately, most governance is at the state level. So even if it doesn't affect the country, India as a nation, it does affect a state or a state. Economic growth, which is now containing many of these challenges, you cannot be sure of sustained economic growth. It's not your birthright to get it. Right now, we're going through that good spot. And even if the growth is there, if it's not inclusive enough with the social media and aspirations, all these countries, social media played a very critical role in mobilizing the youth. So what happened today as opposed to earlier? The aspirations of youth are today very great. Earlier, they were much more modest because they did not even know what was happening to the other people in the world. Whereas now, the expectation is I'm entitled to that kind of a life. But the reality is, because of the society's inherent inequalities or failure to govern well or give opportunity and dignity, you really can't reach there. Therefore, the frustration is deeper. So that's there in India too. So we must not be sanguine. But we certainly did a few things right, preserve those few things, the right things. The few things we are doing wrong, like failure of local governments, a political culture which is utterly hedonistic and power-centric, failure of rule of law, we must correct those.
So just to follow up on that, because this comes pretty often when we talk about India's failings. People often say, hey, it's a large state and that's why we fail. And it's European states are smaller, easier to govern. This is exactly the opposite. These are smallest countries that are sort of fragmenting into different. So whereas India being a seventh largest country still stands strong. How do you see that?
This idea of large state and small state, I think we overstate it. It matters. I'm not denying it because as a homogeneous country, a small state is likely to be more homogeneous. Single race, single faith, and single color of the skin, and so on and so forth, and maybe shared history and language. But barring that one thing, there is nothing that makes a small state more efficacious than a big state. China has demonstrated. True. United States. These two are the first and third largest countries in the world. And now, while we are way behind the curve, we are more or less trying to rediscover what China has done about 30 years ago, 20 years ago. The way I look at it is, a large state and a small state, large state is multiple modules. It's a modular structure. I remember visiting Singapore on behalf of the Administrative Reforms Commission and meeting the Singapore Public Service Commission chairperson, a lady. I was astounded when she said, we don't centralize recruitment of all the government officials in this commission. A tiny country, city-state, probably 5 million population, 6 million of that order, 5, 6, 7 million. She felt that centralization was not the right thing, and therefore each department recruits their own officials, and this commission only ensures that the guidelines are followed, there's a fairness in recruitment. Whereas in a country of 1.4 billion population, we think one UPSC alone must recruit everybody. Now, tell me, who is acting in a more sensible manner? UPSC is doing a grand job in this country. I'm not talking about the efficacy of an organization, But even a small nation could actually embrace the idea of federalization in a different sense. So the small or big is, I think, overstated. It's more about once you got the module right and once you decentralize power adequately, big is nothing but multiples of small. And that's the way to build it wisely, because democracy operates here, not there.
So Navya and Aditya brought in the neighborhood. So post a gruesome attack at Pahalgam earlier this year, I think our ties with Pakistan hit a low once again. And Operation Sindoor followed. And what a lot of quarters in the security establishment feel is that this could be a template that the government will choose to follow in subsequent acts of terror. So what's your take on this?
See, when there is a terrible act of terror, extraterritorially instigated, and I think there's very little doubt about that. Pakistan has been playing that unfortunate role. Establishment in Pakistan is playing that unfortunate role for their own reasons, is now, I think, universally accepted. You cannot keep quiet. If it's an isolated act of terror because of a few individuals who have misplaced notions of what is right and wrong, it is not state-sponsored terrorism. So your military might is not the real issue. You have to find other means of protecting yourself. Now here certainly we must send a signal. The reason why that signal could not be sent effectively for the past 2-3 decades is both nations are now avowedly nuclear powers. Now the globe, as well as the countries, the responsible governments, would be very wary of picking up a quarrel with a neighbor who is nuclear, who has nuclear weapon status. Particularly when a country like Pakistan, the establishment, in a very reckless manner, actually threatens to use nuclear weapons. Because India, for instance, has a doctrine that we will never use it first. No first use doctrine. Pakistan never embraced that. So there is that amount of uncertainty. So I think what happened in this case is, we said you cannot browbeat us and blackmail us with the nuclear status all the time. Because when we keep this retaliation within reasonable limits, in our case we kept it in reasonable limits. We did not even attack the army infrastructure. It's only terrorist infrastructure. Probably they were actually wrong in not having destroyed the communication network of the armed forces. And that's the reason why some of the losses that our people might have suffered is because of that. We didn't really paralyze their communication network. We were that careful, overly cautious. But basically, it's a conflict which did not rise above a threshold. Therefore, it's inconceivable that it will go nuclear way. But subject to that, we have the right to retaliate, and we can inflict significant pain, is what we have established. Therefore, my own belief is, chances are that Pakistan will be much more careful in future. Earlier, we can do whatever we like, but they can't do anything. Now they know they can hit back. So I don't expect Pakistan to be overtly involved in acts of terror like this. There'll be covert involvement with a plausible deniability, but that's something we have to live with. But overt sponsorship of terrorism hopefully will come down. And if it does indulge in that, certainly now there is a template, and India knows the rule book.
So we saw another terror attack later in the year, the explosion in Delhi. And there's obviously no apparent political actor in this case. There could be covert involvement, but there's nothing on an overt level. So do you think now the state must be able to distinguish between political violence stemming from political actors and other forms of violence where the political actor may not be as apparent?
It's a great question. If there are secular goals of a group of people, even if there are acts of terror, at least we know what is it that they're demanding, what is the way out. For instance, Irish Republican Army, they wanted a merger with Ireland, Southern Ireland, Irish Republic. And therefore, for years and maybe for decades, they indulged in violence and acts of brutal terror. But there's a political demand. Ultimately, there was a negotiation during Tony Blair's time. And Northern Ireland was given practically a state status, though they don't call them states and provinces in Britain. Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, they have their own legislative assemblies with their own devolution and so on and so forth. Some kind of a federal structure has come about because it's a political demand. If what we call Naxals or Maoists, in a misplaced sense of idealism, if they indulge in violence as they have done in this country for quite some time in various phases, we know these demands are political, and there are some objective conditions that attract some of the young people in villages or sometimes lumpen elements into this. Therefore, apart from doing whatever it takes to contain them, we also know what needs to be done to reform, to involve. But if your goals are otherworldly, if they are not goals that you and I can understand or fathom or address, then humanity has a challenge. For this, the Australian terror attack recently, a father and son duo, apparently the father is of Hyderabadi origin, incidentally. We would like Hyderabad to be great, but we don't want recognition of that kind. Or the case you mentioned in Delhi, or the umpteen number of acts of terror by lone wolves, isolated, ostensibly motivated by a certain outdated theological doctrine, then human society has a challenge. But I must also hasten to add, every religion, every doctrine had these difficulties in their history, because after all religions came from tribalism. H.G. Wells, in his history of the brief history of the world, says religions at that point of time was their notion of right and wrong, and also their notion of science, incidentally. For instance, in our own, in English, you have the expression bolt from the blue. What is it? That a thunder is actually a bolt from the gods. In our own Indian mythology, it is supposed to be the bolt that fell from Arjuna's chariot. I mean, yes, the imagination is incredible. Obviously, nobody seriously believes that, right? But what happened is religions got modernized. Religion has two elements. One element is how do you reconcile individual behavior, desires with collective good? Because we are in a human society. That is, in my book, that is the essence of religion. That is the purpose of religion, the functionality of religion. The other is the mythology surrounding it and the doctrine surrounding it about the notion of God and acceptance or non-acceptance of others. Every one of these faiths have a great deal to offer to humanity. You take Islam, it is an incredibly egalitarian faith, the notion of equality, as long as you are within that faith. You take Hinduism, all embracing, every philosophy, every stream of thought is perfectly welcome. That's why Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. The truth is only one. Wise people find different paths. Christianity, compassion and love. Jesus Christ taught that. Buddhism, reverence for life, non-violence. Every religion, every faith has this. Even Confucianism, it's not a formal faith or anything. It's about an orderly society and individual conduct and behavior and so on and so forth. But the problem is, if your notion of God does not allow the other person's notion of God, basically your religious freedom, by definition, is anti-religious freedom of others. Now, every faith has these dark spots. Hinduism had and continues to have in some measure caste system. We had terrible practices like sati, etc. But a conscious effort is made to overcome them, though there are still some people who may adhere to those notions, but that is not what is acceptable. Christianity, Bruno, he was executed by the Pope because Bruno was a man of science. He was perhaps the first man to be executed by the Catholic Church because of science. But Christianity came out of that. Christianity got modernized. Galileo was incarcerated. But now the Pope or somebody else, they acknowledge their past mistakes, and that's not their theology. So is the case with every faith. Now, Islam too probably has to go through that process. What is relevant to modernity What is irrelevant? The tribal notions of God, not accepting any other God, and therefore the idea of Darul Harab and Darul Islam, it has to be addressed. But by the people within the faith. People outside the faith cannot address that. Just like reform took place in other faiths over centuries and is continuing to take place, I'm sure that process will have to go on in Islam itself. And until that time, societies must find ways to address this challenge, at least to maintain order and to minimize acts of terror. There are no easy answers.
So on that note, so you talk about reforms and you talk about how theology is sort of a central belief system, and there have been reforms across different organized religions or faiths. Why do you think there is some resistance, if at all, to reforms across? I'm not talking about specific religion. Why do you think there is resistance to reforms?
I would say two things. One is, once we're used to a certain pattern for generations, and particularly when allegedly it is sanctified by divinity and God and revelation and a prophet or something, then there is, you're torn apart psychologically, emotionally. The rational part tells you what is good, because when you deal with your own family, your own children, you don't follow that. Right? If you love the children and family, because your common sense tells you, your own instinct for self-preservation tells you something different. But the doctrine told you something else. So that's, I suppose, in every faith, that's inevitable. But there's a more primal reason for the bulk of the resistance. There's always a class of people who are dominating and who benefit from these theological notions.
Yes.
Generally speaking, the priestly class.
Yes.
It's there with the Christian clergy. It's there with the Hindu priests. It's there with the Islamic clergy, I'm sure. And they tend to be dominant for generations, right? For centuries. Now, you're basically saying you cut off your feet. Now, tell me which ruling class ever said, I will gladly give up my power and control or economic gain for the sake of public good, larger good. So it is going to be a tortuous process.
So you also mentioned Maoist violence. So the Home Minister himself has stated that March 2026 is when he aims to wipe out Maoist terror from the country. Now, even the stats seem to back this. So in 2025, there was an increase year on year of surrenders. I think 1,500 more people surrendered in the past 1 year compared to the year before that. So do you think there's genuine reasons to believe that we are at the end of this long drawn bloody battle?
In this phase, because we've had Naxalbari violence in the 1960s, late 60s, and this particular form of Maoist violence has started in the 70s. I was undergoing training in a district where I think for the first time in India, 2 blocks or taluks were declared as disturbed areas. And while Andhra Pradesh, the combined Andhra Pradesh, has substantially addressed it effectively. Now, several other states have fallen prey to it in the last decade or more. Now, it looks like in this phase, some amount of quiet and peace is going to prevail. And that's the way it should be. Because once we have democratic rights, the right to choose a government and vote out a government, and the political freedoms to articulate your point of view and to organize peacefully, you have no right to resort to violence. Under no circumstances can violence be justified in a democratic society. There are no ifs and there are no buts. There cannot be any excuse for indulging in violence as long as the freedom is there, as long as the right to vote and elect a government is there. But having said that, there are also objective conditions in India which exclude a very large number of our people from the economic growth process, which don't give sufficient amount of dignity and opportunity to the people that they deserve, which our constitution promises. And these are failings of governance. There's a failure of rule of law, quality education, rural-urban divide, healthcare inadequate access, and high degree of centralization of power, and a whole lot of things. Now, unless we address them and give the bulk of the people, 100% people will not be satisfied 100%. But if the bulk of the people in a very substantial measure feel that yes, it's a reasonable system, even if there are some problems and challenges, and if I work hard And if I have some talent, I can make something of my life. The society gives me that opportunity. If that faith is not there, there will always some angry hearts. If not in this form, in some other form. If not today, and some other day. You'll always have some form of violence. It may be anarchic, it may be chaotic, it may be organized. Therefore, while we should welcome this phase, to think that we have addressed all our problems and there is no propensity for violence in this country, and there's nobody who is going to be angry about our governance system, that will be very foolhardy, that notion. We have challenges. And we have to peacefully and fairly address them and give confidence to the people.
So, so this Naxalite surrendering, like you said, could be temporary, but that doesn't mean it should be peripheral, right? So there is a chance that this is like a cyclical thing, that these Maoists might re-emerge under a different name. So how do we, as a democratic nation, make sure this re-emergence does not happen?
Pallavi, I personally think it's unlikely that Maoists or any form of extremist left-wing violence will resurface, because that's over. After the collapse of Soviet Union and after the discrediting of that collective and controlled economy model, that's not where people are. But some other form of violence may arise, and it may be even anarchic. It may simply manifest itself as anger on the streets and Rasta Roko and very many anarchic and chaotic things. I don't really believe that Maoist violence will probably resurface in any big way, but some form of violence, because they are angry people. If they feel desperate, boxed in, then violence is something that we have to anticipate. And sometimes it may be very unorganized. It may be a great deal of turbulence. So that's what I mean when I say we should not be sanguine.
So, just to follow up on that, you said the Maoist form of violence will not sort of re-emerge. But do you think, like the government is currently working on a target, right? If I'm not wrong, it's March 2026 as the target, right? Do you think we might, in numerological terms, be like, of course, we don't have any Maoists anymore, but the root cause will still prevail? We cannot, can we do it sort of by 2026 March? Can we get away with the root cause of?
No, obviously not. As we discussed earlier, there are objective conditions that make many people happy, not included, and they feel they are victims of injustice. Now, we have to sometimes know some of these claims or complaints may not be very valid. But to the extent that they are valid, the state and the political process have a duty to set things right, and therefore rule of law. Honestly, there is no rule of law in India the way it should be. Normatively, it is there.
Yes.
But in reality, if a case takes 10, 15 years to be settled in a court of law, if crime investigation is entirely politically driven and it's very partisan, if third degree and extracting confession is habitual in the society, if to go to a law court, it's the money power that you have and the kind of lawyer that you engage that matters, not the facts in your case. And if education is not accessible to you, however bright you are, you have third-rate education, and merely because you are born in the wrong womb, and you don't have an opportunity in life, won't people be angry? And these are all things that we should be addressing irrespective of violence. You don't require Naxalite violence or Maoist violence to tell us, look, there is a problem. If we don't look at the problem and find a solution, that means the governance process is now reduced to getting into power and exercising power for personal gain. It's not our public good. And therefore, there are objective conditions, and they're not going to be set right overnight. But Indian people are very smart, very wise. If there is a credible roadmap, if the governing classes and the political system are addressing the challenges, even if the miracles don't happen overnight, people are very patient. But if there's no credible roadmap, if they feel that nothing is going to change no matter how many times we elect a government or throw out a government, then some form of violence is always potentially there. We are risking a future.
Sir, if we can claim that rule of law is just normative in the Indian society, and if electoral participation sort of always comes with something happening behind the scenes, what do you think the bedrock of democracy truly is in India? Do you think one of these precede the other? Where do you think it truly lies?
No, Myron Weiner talked about the 4 postulates of a functioning democracy. India ticks all the boxes right. You have political freedoms. There's no question about it. Notwithstanding some people making somewhat outrageous statements, we have broadly political freedom, freedom of organization, freedom of speech, freedom of association, all kinds of things. We have very fierce electoral competition. True that most of them are roughly similar kind of people, and they again recruit quote unquote leaders from the same pool. Not always desirable, but at least there is genuine competition and no holds barred competition, life or death competition. So at least we have the satisfaction of throwing the bums out. The third, electoral governments are really an authority and power. We take Pakistan, for instance. Elections are no election. Nobody knows who is actually in power. Everybody knows it's the armed forces. It's Munir. It doesn't matter who is the prime minister, which party wins. Then there's no legitimacy. In India, that's not the case. You may like them, you may not like them, but elected governments are really in position of authority. They actually make difference. And 4, the winners do not punish the losers merely because they lost an election. You don't hang a fellow because you lost the election. You don't imprison him for life because you lost an election. Of course, there are attempts because of the absence of rule of law or inadequate rule of law, attempts to foist cases, etc. But these are all good sport, I mean, they do it to you, you do it to them. So these 4 postulates were very strong. But that apart, we did a few things right. There has been not only a peaceful transfer of power in the country, elections we never really manipulated or anything. As you said, whatever happened was because of the political culture, not because of a manipulation of the electoral process. That's not the case in India. And we built a very strong federalism, particularly last 30 years, though initially it was flawed. And we addressed our great diversity in a very, very sensible manner, linguistic diversity, religious faith, and other things. And while we did not do enough of a job, there has been a very conscious effort to bring the subalterns, the marginalized sections, whether it's reservations or special dispensation for the weak and the poor and welfare system, etc. For whatever reason, political system has embraced those things. And with all these, there is modest economic growth, not great economic growth. Of late, it's accelerating. Let's hope it continues to accelerate. But it was never negative growth or anything like that. So while it's not good enough to fulfill our aspirations, there is still some hope. These are the things that are keeping us afloat, but they're not enough. They're good. We should embrace them. They're not enough. We deserve more. We need more.
So, now that you've mentioned electoral manipulation, I think last year was defined politically by vote chori as well. The campaign, and bureaucratically by SIR as well. So I want to differentiate between the two first of all, right? The political claim of the primary opposition party for vote chori is the addition of fake votes that gives, their claim is that gives them buffer time to cast false votes. Let's talk about addition first. So there have been press conferences, there have been debates about it, that you add fake voters. There is a Brazilian model's photo that was going around social media doing rounds. Her photo was used in Haryana elections hundreds and thousands of times, giving buffer space for the ruling dispensation to cast their votes. Your take on that?
First, about the broad allegations or complaints. If indeed electoral rolls are severely flawed, and they are,
Yes.
whether it's deliberate manipulation or the normal inertia of the system and inefficiency, that will come to it later. Then you must want a full-scale revision of electoral rolls.
Correct.
With proper monitoring. So you cannot say that voter list is flawed, and you cannot say intensive revision is not necessary. That itself shows that we become a naysaying democracy. If I'm not in power, whatever you suggest, I'll say no to you. So I don't take that very seriously. It's not credible. Now, voter lists, unquestionably, they're flawed. particularly in urban areas, but to some extent even in rural areas. FDR looks at the ourselves did surveys way back 25 years ago into 99 election, before 99 election, and then 2004. Even in those 5 years, there's significant improvement. We found something like about 12% errors in rural areas. Errors defined as wrongful inclusion. The person may have died, the person may have moved out of the place, or the address might have changed, and still the name finds place. And wrongful exclusion. Wrongful in the sense eligible to vote, but the person's name is not finding place. Together, about 12% errors were there in rural areas. Urban areas, 40% were there in 99. But within 5 years, rural areas came down to 5%. Urban came down to 12%. That means the process, in fact, what the FDR looks at that drove the process. We repeatedly met the election commission. I remember Mr. Gopalaswamy, as a former Home Secretary, became just then the election commissioner. I think Mr. Krishnamurthy was the chief election commissioner, or Mr. Lingdo, I don't remember who it was at that time. I remember making presentations and pushing them, and then voter identity cards became universal. Slowly, they improved some of the processes, etc. So within 5 years, 12% became 5% in rural areas. Urban areas, 40-45% became 10-12%. Not good enough, but you can see the improvement. Then we actually verified from the list, they come marked electoral, where after voting, they actually put a mark, these people voted. We took that from the polling booths. On a sampling basis, we surveyed every single voter. We found that the potential fraudulent vote, we don't know, all we can say is we could not locate the voter. Other people we located and they said, yes, we voted. Whom we voted, we're not interested. We didn't bother. So some people we could not locate. So it could be fraudulent votes, whatever. That number was 1.2%. Rural was only about 0.5%. Urban was about 1.5, 1.6%. Overall, it's coming to 1.1%. Even that is bad. Even 0.5% should not be there. But the point is, you are confusing between electoral roll errors with vote chori, fraudulent voting. You're also confusing the process of voter registration with the normal election conduct. Normal election conduct is a time-bound process. In those 2-3 months, election is notified, election is completed. There's a 2 month or so gap. That period, election commission calls the shots. Rest of the 4 years, 10 months is when actually voter registration takes place. Once election is notified, there's almost no voter registration. In fact, after the nominations are finalized, we cannot even register legally the last minute. Now, during this 4 years, 10 months, who is in charge of the government? The state government. Who controls every single officer and employee's fortunes? The state government. So, because in this whole discussion, an attempt is made to somehow besmirch the election commission. I hold no brief for the election commissioner or somebody else. They can defend themselves. But election commission as an institution has no role at all in voter registration. Yes, they frame the guidelines. We can question the guidelines. If the guideline is bad, we'll question them. But the process is entirely governed by the government in the state, and the bureaucracy under the full control of the government in the state in this 4 years, 10 months period. That is the reality. So we have to still improve it. In my opinion, post office can still be made a nodal agency, though with digitalization, etc., a lot of improvements have taken place, definitely. And some of the young people, when I asked our team and others, those who are now eligible to vote, to try and enroll, and they find the digital system is working. If there are still some deficiencies, we can set it right. But it's not enough. I'm a technophobe. I still believe in the post office, some other place where I can go without having to go to the computer, etc. And we owe it to our people to give that opportunity, because the post office is a respected, credible, trusted agency, generally free from corruptions. We can have some other mechanisms. So there are a lot of improvement if possible and necessary. I think that effort is being made. And by the way, India is the only country probably in the world with practically everybody having a photo identity card, voter identity card, and the voter rolls, the voter registers containing the photograph of the voter. Subject to correction, I don't know of any other country where the voter list actually carries your photograph. And the voting process has many safeguards. The polling booth agents of each candidate are there. Election officials, the polling officials, they verify your thing and they take your mark and they put this this indelible ink and so on and so forth. So there's a whole lot of process there. Despite all that, some mistakes may happen. Despite all that, some mischief may happen. In a country of 1.5 billion people with about 1 billion voters, if anybody says there's zero mischief in Indian conditions, you're talking through your hat. But it is a normal process. It's a normal error margin. No country in the world, not Britain, not United States, can claim that their voter rolls are 100% perfect. So while we must endeavor to make it as close to perfection as possible, to exaggerate this and to extrapolate this and to conflate voter list errors with the deliberate fraud, and that with election commission's partisan attitude, and that with vote chori, is absolutely out of this world.
So I would like to spend more time on that because that sort of defined political narrative for 2025. So for you talked about some minor sort of aberrations, right? The press conference, they mentioned 25.4 lakh sort of buffer votes, fraudulent votes, right? This is a big number. Who do you think should be the credible primary, which agency should respond to this? Should it be the Election Commission? Who should be the agency that they should have this question to? The reason I'm asking this, because of course there is innate trust in the Election Commission of India, right? And for the fact that, because we've mentioned rule of law is already very normative, right? And if we sort of establish that, hey, look, the electoral process also is normative, it's difficult to call India a democracy.
I tell you. See, the reason why this kind of a discussion, either uninformed or exaggerated, is dangerous is, it's not the truth that matters in elections and democracy. If the perception is that the election is manipulated, the country is in grave danger. The reason why, for instance, people like me should speak out truthfully, based on evidence, not be afraid to wade into partisan political debate. Ordinarily, you and I would not like to.
True.
On this issue, I've been very vocal. Not because I like or dislike any party. If the people lose faith in the integrity of the electoral process, then democracy is in grave danger. At least that's one thing that we have maintained in this country, with all our flaws. I have been probably one of the strongest voices in India in the past 3 decades about the political failures of India, our governance crisis, and the many things that are wrong with the electoral system. From vote buying to short-term welfare becoming the mainstay, to dividing society and caste and region, religious, tribal loyalties. All these are terrible. And of course, political parties, absence of internal democracy, all these are real problems. So this kind of a discussion is deflecting attention of the real problems. It is not anybody's case that there are no real challenges in our political system. There are. But this kind of a very mechanical approach, without understanding or without caring to speak the truth, is actually doing immense damage to what is good in our democracy. And therefore, the duty of the Election Commission is to make it as transparent as possible. In this case, what seems to have happened, I have not followed very carefully, but what seems to have happened is the Election Commission's somewhat perfunctory approach and peremptory approach. It's not right. Even if the allegation lacks substance, when it comes from anybody, frankly, but particularly when it comes from a major political party, a recognizable party, and in particular from the major opposition party and the leader of opposition, it is your duty to humbly go before the nation and those parties and explain to them fully, as many times as necessary, as often as, don't lose patience, not become reckless, not tick them off. No. Because you are the custodians of the integrity of the electoral process. It's your duty to restore that credibility or to maintain that credibility. There probably Election Commission has not done as good a job as it should. For instance, if you remember, the electronic voting machines, all kinds of allegations
Yes,
for the past
yes.
20, 25 years. Each time, the Election Commission very humbly, very systematically addressed those challenges publicly in a very transparent manner. Still, there are some people who say, I don't believe.
Yeah.
That's okay. You cannot convince everybody. You're a human being, you're free to speak whatever you like. But no serious person in India with any degree of credibility or fidelity to truth will make that allegation about electronic voting machines, because time and again the commission has come before the people in a very transparent manner. The same approach should have been followed here. I think that was a failing.
So we have talked about addition. I want to talk about deletion. That is the SIR exercise. A bureaucratic question. This is not a political issue as such. So a lot of sort of allegations on this is politically disenfranchisement, especially of a particular section of the population, right? For example, certain analysis show that Muslims comprise 17% of population in Bihar, but 25% of deletions, right? There's also this insane amount of pressure on BLOs to go ahead and sort of conduct these exercises. I think the number says that 30 booth level officers have committed Bihar due to SIR. From a bureaucratic framework, what could the Election Commission have done better in this?
Okay, let's take these two things separately. The BLOs, the pressure. I find it utterly insane to talk about pressure and the bureaucracy in India. In general, what is our complaint? Bureaucracy does not deliver. It's very well paid, the cushy jobs, and even a low-level bureaucrat, a BLO is a low-level bureaucrat.
Yes.
We all know that. Is bigger than and more powerful than and more economically secure than 90% of the people of the country. So actually, our being extra sympathetic to the employees of government when they were asked to do the rightful duty under the constitutional law, I find it somewhat amusing. I don't understand what it's about. So that's a nonsensical argument. You must never emotionalize an issue saying that somebody died of a heart attack or somebody committed suicide. You must always go by what is the prevailing population norm. The number of heart attacks, number of unexplained, unexpected deaths or suicides. There is a standard number. If that number is outrageously unusual in a certain case, then you must examine it. This is totally uninformed, silly discussion without an understanding statistics. There is no evidence to suggest that employees of government are dying in any larger numbers than the rest of the population of that age group. If anything, they are dying in less numbers. And they should die in less numbers, in fewer numbers. So, I have to be crude because this is a very crude kind of a discussion, a very crude debate. And in a sensible, rational system, you must never use suicide as an argument. It's absurd. Supposing there's no problem. So what are you trying to say? If you commit, take it as a problem, otherwise I'll not take it as a problem. What rubbish are we talking? So that must be dismissed with the contempt it deserves. No, the first part of the question. Come again, what is it? Give me.
So they're saying that this deletion of voters is specifically targeting a specific section.
Now, the way to analyze, if you are rational, is what is the population percentage of Muslims in a state or some other group, urban or rural or whatever. What percentage of them are listed as voters?
Yes.
Because we have standard demographic norms. How many people, what percentage of the population in a given state, not every state has the same statistical data, because above 18 and below 18, Bihar will have very many below 18, because Bihar fertility rate is still high. Southern states will have fewer below 18s, and therefore the population eligible to vote as a percentage of the total population is higher in southern states. So depending on those numbers, you first verify what is the population percentage above 18 in that group according to estimates, what is the number that are registered, not how many people are deleted or added. Now that number, nobody has ever mentioned that is less than what it should be.
Yes.
Therefore, there's no merit in the complaint. Now, I do not know the conditions about Bihar or West Bengal or Northeast or some other state. I have no authority. I have no claim to any kind of expertise. But if significant amount of migration from neighboring countries, unauthorized, is taking place, what Americans call illegal aliens are there, or unauthorized non-citizen migrants are there, probably if deletions are required, we require to delete a few more of them. True. So it is not this community or that community. You go by what proportion of the population is actually registered as voters. Is it conforming to your demographic norms or not? And about specifics of deletions, in addition to that, you go by the local conditions. Without that, this broad-based, generally Hindu or Muslim or some other caste, I know it arouses a lot of animosities in the country, arouses emotions. All the more reason why responsible leaders must bring down the temperatures. We have enough of schisms in our society, caste, region, religion, language, other things. Wise people would not use them as baits to incite the population.
Sir, the allegations of vote chori apart and the concerns around SIR apart, what are some electoral reforms that our system actually does need? And maybe could you spell out what are the low-hanging fruits that we have and what are some of the long-term goals that we can go after?
Let me talk about the long-term goals first. You cannot have a very healthy democracy when the political parties that actually mediate democracy are themselves undemocratic. In the large part, Indian political parties are monarchical, autocratic. They function like political fiefdoms and private estates. I am saying this without any serious fear of contradiction. So the political contest, which is very real, competition is very real as we discussed earlier, is actually rigged even before the election. So this real contest is actually an illusion. It's true, between two people who should ascend that office, there is a real contest. But how are they chosen by the major political parties to be the leading candidates? It's not in your hands and my hands. It's not by any fair democratic process. It's because of muscle power, it's because you're a crony, because of a caste, because of pedigree, a father, mother, something. Then where is democracy? So unless the political parties are democratized, our democracy is not safe. That means the choice of leadership in the party, the choice of membership free to the people. Nobody should decide whether I should be a member of your party or not. It's not your private party. A political party is a voluntary collection of people, voluntary association of people. If I believe in your ideology, then I will join your party. Now the party bosses can say you get out or you come in. It's entirely there. Then the funding, but most important of all, the choice of candidates put up by the political party. Because in India, while legally, on paper, the contest is between the candidates, in reality, the contest is between the parties. If you're not a candidate of a major recognized political party, you don't really exist. 99.5% of the people elected are candidates of the major political parties. The 0.5% independents elected are rebels who temporarily contest independence. Immediately after the election, they join this or that party. So really speaking, our political contest is between parties. And if parties are not democratic, how can you have democracy in the country? The second is the electoral system. We come so far in our malpractices in elections, vote buying, in our sad practices, if you not be malpractice legally, of short-term inducements dominating the long-term collective good. And of course, dividing society and caste, region, other grounds. These have become the staple of our democracy. They cannot be overcome through normal democratic evolution in any time in the next few decades. They ordinarily should have been not there if we built our democracy on stronger foundations from day one. We failed to do so. Ours is basically a democracy of vote and shout. We vote with great celebration. There is no country which is louder in its election campaigns and voting. And we shout with great celebration and anger. Rasta Roko, Hartal, protest, demonstration, we are good at both. They are both necessary, but they are not sufficient. That's not true democracy. Now, if you want to get reasonably rapid change, you have to change the electoral system. The incentive for the candidate, for the voter, for the political party, for all these three must change so that you don't have to buy the vote. And everybody in India who understands politics knows the amount of illegitimate money power now deployed for the electoral success. And once you deploy that, you think there's going to be good governance, we are talking through your hat. I mean, if I spend 30 crores in a poor country for an assembly election, and then you expect me to be honest in the next 5 years and serve the cause of the public, I mean, you ought to have your head examined. You see, they become victims of a vicious cycle, the politicians themselves. To change that, one easiest way of doing that is go for a proportional representation system where the marginal vote, the extra vote you get, is not what determines victory. It is the overall percentage of the vote that you get across the board in a whole geography, the state or the nation, that determines your political success. So that you're not afraid that, my God, if I don't pay this bribe, I will not get these 20 votes, therefore I lose the election. So that you're willing to take rational policies forward, because even if I lose some people, I still retain my viability and credibility. Whereas in the current model of first past the post system, you take a rational approach, you lose the election, nobody is going to sympathize with you saying that you're taken the right stand, but bad luck, you lost power. So you have to go, but with certain caveats. How do you ensure stability of a government? Because proportionality does not ensure stability the way first past the post system does. There are ways of doing it. You can give bonus suits to the largest party in sufficient numbers. How do you ensure there is no fragmentation of our polity? Already we are driven by caste, region, religion, other things. So you don't need, for every small caste, one political party, for every fringe group, one political party, and getting some votes and seats. You have to have a threshold. So with those caveats, you can change the electoral system. The third biggest change is the fundamental one, more fundamental one. We should have done 50, 60, 70, 75 years ago. That is effective, empowered, accountable local governments. We don't have effective local governments. We don't have empowered local governments. We don't have accountable local governments. We have local governments of sorts. It's a myth. And further, there is a farce of an election. Even there, much money is spent with neither the power, nor the authority, nor accountability. If you do that, what happens is people understand, whom am I voting? If I am voting for Akshat, I know that Akshat will take care of the following things. It's not illusory, it's not Bharat Mata. It's the things that matter to me here, now. I can see that. I don't require to be a BA in political science. It's my life, my family's life. And once I see the link between the vote and the consequences to my life in a way I perceive, between the taxes I pay and the services I get or I don't get, then my vote becomes mature. I won't be conditioned by money power. I won't allow my caste or other things to become dominant because my life and my family is more important than my caste. It's a bigger line. And authority fuses with accountability. The fellow in authority cannot say, no, somebody else is guilty. No, you and you alone are responsible. These are the hallmarks of a functioning democracy, a good democracy. We don't have them. Now, will it happen anytime soon? I hope so, but it may take time. Therefore, maybe low-hanging fruit. There is no logical reason why any party can oppose the idea of internal democracy in parties. In Germany, under Article 21, the Constitution mandates that there shall be federal law to regulate political parties to this extent, no more, no less. We're not telling the party what your policies are. We're not telling the party where you contest, where you don't contest. No, your business. But a party, the moment you're a political party, you're no longer a private organization. Because what is the party doing? The party is asking for power over you. You're not saying, I'll do my own business. You're not saying, I'll take care of the rocks, I'll take care of some nature. No. You're saying, I want power over you, Akshat. Vote for me. That is what a party is, right? The moment you seek power over you, power to make legislation, power to collect taxes and spend money, you can no longer claim privileges of an individual. You have to be accountable to the people. To this limited extent, how you're functioning. So that, I think, is a low-hanging fruit. By a simple law, we can do it. And there's no way the political parties can claim immunity from that. If they do that, people will understand that. So to me, it's a low-hanging fruit. Local governments, we destroyed them by a very half-baked, well-meaning, but useless 73rd, 74th Amendments. I don't see much of improvement likely to happen anytime soon. But what we can do is, urban areas are becoming increasingly self-reliant because money is now in urban areas. All economy is in urban areas. There was a time when we used to say municipalities are helpless, they have no money. Today, that's not true. Municipalities are where the money is. And the urban voters they understand the problems because they are a little better than the rural voters, more literate, more experienced, more capable of problem solving. And some very capable people live in urban areas, experienced people. So they're also demanding better services. They're angry at the failure of urban governance, like traffic in Hyderabad or something else somewhere else, the drinking water problems or potholes on the roads and 100 other things. So you can therefore mobilize them into a strong and powerful voice to at least empower the urban local governments. The Constitution does give you space, for instance, the ward committees. Only on paper they are there, we destroyed them in spirit. So urban local governance, we should do that. And third is improve at least the quality of education. We are spending a lot of money. School education, improve the quality, not merely mugging up and rote learning and mass copying, but make them think a little bit as citizens. It will take time, but definitely you'll have a better class of citizens. At least these things we should start right away.
So you've also mentioned, because this year there were a lot of state elections and we're talking about electoral reforms in that space. You've also mentioned a few times that we are one election away from chaos.
Yes, I cannot.
I just wanted you to.
I cannot get out of that thinking. Because, the way some of the parties are behaving in some of the states, or several parties are behaving in some states, actually, it's as if there's no tomorrow. As if our children's future does not matter. All that matters is somehow or other I want to be in power today. If the state is destroyed in the process, I don't care. Now, in that climate, if we are still somehow managing some kind of fiscal prudence at the national level and some of the states, if somehow we are managing some reasonable, if modest economic growth, of late slightly accelerated economic growth, it's actually a miracle. All it takes is we simply give up even this minimal degree of fiscal prudence, even this minimal degree of concern about economic growth and infrastructure, and then play politics in a no-holds-barred way. I'll use this caste, I'll use that weapon, I'll use this kind of a short-term welfare measure, whether it's sustainable or not immaterial. And if they are seen to be getting into power again and again, then all bets are off. Because paisa mein paramatma. Ultimately, if you don't manage your finances as a household or as a nation prudently, then all our talk, the rest of the talk is idle. You sink into a bottomless pit. And once economic growth plummets, once fiscally you don't manage it well at all, then we discussed earlier, when aspirations are not fulfilled, so many people are angry.
Yes.
No, when aspirations are not fulfilled at all for anybody, then you have a prescription for chaos and violence and anarchy in society. So India is always on the verge because the political consensus desperately required for at least some of the basic things. We build infrastructure, we promote economic growth and investment, we have rational and sound economic policies and fiscal policy. At least this much. And there is so much of a room for divergence in the rest of the areas.
Yes.
How do I improve quality of education? How do I make healthcare accessible and without an out-of-pocket expenditure for everybody? There are several models. There's no one model. How do I improve rule of law? How do I improve the political system? We discussed so many things.
Yes.
How do I decentralize power and accountability? How do I, what do I do with nuclear power, for instance? Right now they came up with a bill. Is that the best model or something else is required? How do I have energy transition in a manner that does least damage to the society? There are many issues on which you have to have debate. You have to have alternatives. That's what politics is about. If you are not even agreeing on the need for economic growth and investment in infrastructure, fiscal prudence, and the need not to burden the next generation with unsustainable debt without creating any assets for them, if even that we don't agree, then we are in chaos.
Talking about economy as we're doing right now, there were a number of things that happened, but one that I want to start with are the GST reforms that happened. where the GST rationalization, it reduced the number of slabs. So right now there is 5% and 18%, and there is a higher rate of 40% for sin and luxury goods. So, and the government presented it as a move towards ease of doing business, simpler taxation, and this is a move that is for the people, right? But in this regard, I want to ask, they are being framed as a pro-common man. But how should we see these moves also in terms of fiscal trade-offs? Because we are talking about fiscal prudence, right? And especially in terms of fiscal federalism.
A good question, Navya. First of all, in the long term, we must depend less and less on indirect taxes, and we must go more for direct taxes. India is nowhere near the required level, but we are slowly improving our direct tax collection, both corporate tax and individual income tax collections, because prosperity is going up. And to some extent, the tax system is improving, not enough. There's still a lot of complaint of corruption, I think very credible complaints of corruption and arbitrariness, though it's not universal. But those who fall under the radar, they're complaining. And therefore, over a period of time, reducing indirect taxes is a correct thing to do. Two, we are facing headwinds in the country, in global headwinds, particularly American tariff challenges. And therefore, if you can't export, then you must generate internal demand in order to sustain your industry and your production process. One way is to reduce the taxation and encourage people to buy more. And I think that seems to be working in some respects. I'm not sure it's always the right thing, because I think from the latest data available, a lot of automobiles are being bought.
Yes.
While we all want automobiles, India needs actually a quite good quality integrated public transport system rather than private automobiles.
Yes.
But that's a separate issue. The fact is that the demand has increased and certain purchasing power has gone up. And in some areas, for instance, healthcare, where the government is failing, they removed the GST, and therefore health insurance, etc., become more accessible. So that is welcome. The third broad point is, right from the inception of GST, what was the complaint made by critics? That A, it's too complex, too many rates, and B, the rates are too high for too many communities. So you can't say, if you do something, you're damned. If you don't do something, you're damned. Now, the government has done this. Therefore, we should welcome it. Now, will this seriously affect the fiscal situation in the country? Luckily for India, and that's where credit must be given to the government at the union level, over the past 10, 11 years, they've done a fairly good job of fiscal management. 10, 12 years ago, we were not comfortable fiscally. There was a much greater fiscal deficit, despite sustained high growth for a significant amount of period from Vajpayee government's days to over 2011 or so, a fairly high growth rate. Despite that, fiscally we were not sound. Two, the banks were in serious crisis at that time. 12.5% or so banks non-performing assets, that basically the due spending defaults. And today it's come down to 2.5% or so, a remarkable improvement. Then infrastructure investment has gone up to the highest level in India's history, record level infrastructure, and with results. In fact, one of the reasons why we're able to sustain high growth despite the trade headwinds globally and against the global norm right now is we're maintaining a fairly high growth rate. 7-8% is a fairly impressive growth, though we deserve and we need about 9-10%. But at least this is good. And two, inflation is very low. This is probably the lowest inflation in my lifetime. I've never heard of India's inflation being 0.25%, 0.5%. We remember 12%, 15%, 18%. Later, 6-8% has become the norm. Lowest inflation. So there are a lot of good things that the government have been able to do. Therefore, fiscally, we now have enough room. That's our good fortune. Supposing last 10 years we managed the finances at the national level badly, we'd have been in disaster now. And because we managed the finances very well, very prudently, and the crisis came in the form of American tariffs and global headwinds, India is able to take steps to address this situation. And that's exactly why fiscal prudence is necessary, not only on a bad day, but also on a good day. because they'll be a bad day schedule.
Sir, in the same regard, another thing that economically happened was the new income tax regime, okay, where zero tax up to 12 lakh via rebates, and that was also a relief for middle class. So in the same context of, what does it mean politically, but also what does it mean economically, where this relief, it increases the disposable income and the consumption, but also how do we view it in terms of longer fiscal public finance?
No, zero income tax is not a good idea as a principle. Some tax should be there so that everybody contributes a little bit. But it's very popular in India. They went for that. They obviously get the political dividends out of that. And as long as they're able to manage the fiscal system well, it's okay. But you look at 12 lakh rupees zero income tax. Basically, in terms of purchasing power, that is roughly equivalent to our purchasing power is about 3.8 times or 3.5 times more than our rupees value. So you assume this is equivalent to about 40 lakh rupees or 45 lakh rupees per annum. Now, that would be equal to roughly about $50,000 in the United States. It's unthinkable that they would have zero tax up to $50,000 in those countries. So it's popular, it's populist. They're able to manage fiscally because otherwise they've taken good care of it. But it's a regressive step in my view. I know it's an unpopular view. But see, if you believe in civilization, taxation is the basis of civilization. You cannot ask for no taxation. What you must ask for is account for the money that is given to you. Spend it wisely. Give me results. You can't say no taxes, but I want everything. Nothing comes out of nothing. It's your money that gives you the public goods. So we have a right to demand better quality public services and goods. But we have no right to demand there should be no taxation. But it's popular. It worked for them. Well, that's it.
So, in light of public services, like you said, another area where policy making is sort of failing is healthcare, is what I would say. Arogyashri, for instance, in the Telugu states, it started off as an electoral promise that later turned into a policy, but somehow failed to deliver when it came to actual performance. Where do you think the issue lies? Do you think it's the policy making in itself, or do you think it's the end implementation that the problem is?
Arogyashri is a good place to start to understand what is happening. Arogyashri is helpful in one respect, but the burden of expenditure is shifted from the individual who is suffering to the state, the taxpayer. And when a significant number of people, because of the healthcare costs, are descending into poverty or becoming indebted, then to that extent that relief is very welcome. But we must not confuse this with improving the healthcare outcomes. These are two different things. We always conflate the two. The burden has shifted. The burden is there, somebody is bearing. That somebody, instead of individual who cannot afford it, is now shifted to the taxpayer. That means the collector. What is government? Government doesn't have money. Narendra Modi doesn't print currency notes, nor does the chief minister. So it is the taxpayer. But unless you design a system and implement it efficiently, which actually improves the quality of health, healthcare outcomes will not improve. So we must distinguish these two things. That means good quality primary health care as a gatekeeper, very efficient one. And as part of primary health care, preventive steps, not only the standard prevention of hygiene and sanitation and vaccination, but with the non-communicable diseases growing, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, etc., early diagnosis and management of lifestyles and, if necessary, medication on a regular basis without allowing them to fester into major problems is critical to improve the quality of health care. Then a proper referral system. And then diagnostics, pharmaceuticals, and the patient care all being rolled into one, integrated. A third point we have to recognize is, if hospital-based Arogyashri becomes the mainstay of healthcare, not only does it not improve the outcomes, eventually the costs will completely overtake you. Because modern healthcare is extremely expensive. New technologies are coming recently. The gene technologies for, let's say, one form of anemia, sickle cell anemia, they have successfully tried in Britain. The probable cost is $1 million per patient. It's fantastic in terms of your intellectual stimulation and your scientific exploration. But it's impossible for it to become a part of healthcare protocol. Because the whole of the world's money is not enough to take care of that. At least that's a case where it works. There are many other interventions of doubtful value, but very high cost value. So if you don't address the problems at the appropriate level, tertiary care will simply bury you in the costs. That's what's happened in the West. Even after spending 10-11% of GDP in Britain, almost nobody is happy with the health system, though NHS was the pioneer in healthcare. In America, 18% is spent by the public and the private together. And yet, despite spending the most amount in the world and the highest per capita income country, the healthcare is in shambles. So you have to design it very carefully to ensure that there's a proper graded system of primary, secondary, tertiary, with gatekeeping and prevention as the mainstay and early diagnosis and maintenance as the mainstay, and at the least cost, and give an incentive to the citizen to protect her health. Ultimately, you are the custodian of health. Yes, there are some things which you can't control as a human being, but to the extent that you can control, you must have incentive to control your own health. It can't be a medically driven or surgically driven process. That's what Singapore has done, for instance. At a fairly low cost, they're able to give world-class healthcare. So we must learn lessons from that and adapt those models to suit our conditions.
Right. So at a national level, do you think there is some sort of reform in financial allocation that should be done in India in regards of healthcare?
No, financing part, in terms of supporting people through Arogyasri model, already they're attempting, though the resources are inadequate. But there is no way India can afford a very significant amount of allocation for healthcare. That's another thing we have to keep in mind. World over, governments spend 8-9% GDP in the rich countries. Singapore is the only country where they spend 3.5% from the government. Maybe we can reach that in 10-15 years' time. In the short term, from 1.3, we can probably reach about 2% in the 3-4 years' time. And then within that, we have some advantages as a country because our pharmaceuticals are top class and low cost. Our vaccines are world class. Many of the high-end interventions are the lowest cost in the world. So we have some strengths. Utilizing the strengths, can we improve significantly the healthcare outcomes at, let's say, 2% GDP? And design the program in such a manner instead of merely putting more money blindly, but in a wise manner. Eventually, can we go to 3.5 like in Singapore and merge beautifully public and private systems and give incentive to the individual? I think that is the way forward. We can't simply imitate Britain or America or France or Germany. We simply don't have that option available.
So one sector where you have always said that we have spent money blindly is education. I want to bring our discussion back to education. Like Pallavi said, these are two things that sort of affect the people, citizens on a day-to-day basis,
Absolutely.
healthcare and education. I want to frame education from also our neighboring countries' point of view. China, for the past 10-20 years, has done remarkably well in education. And it was not the case 10-20 years ago. Do you think that we have missed the boat again in, like, they overtook us in manufacturing and education as well? What did they do right and what did we do wrong?
First of all, China's improvement in the last 20 years in education was in higher education. Their school education was outstanding 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I think that is the way forward. Unless the foundations are strong, unless school education is outstanding and accessible to everybody irrespective of the circumstances of birth, you cannot improve education overall in the country. To pretend that higher education can be improved autonomously with very weak foundations of school education is a disaster. That's the first lesson we must learn from China. And we can do it because school education is spending phenomenal amounts. We discussed it so many times. Yes. We can easily do it by simply improving the assessment because everybody wants quality education in India, except that they don't know what is quality education. That's our problem. And therefore, if you measure the outcomes intelligently, the desired outcomes intelligently and honestly, then the whole system will be geared towards producing those outcomes. The incentives are altered. Higher education in China, what they have done is 20 years ago, as you said rightly, when I visited China, in a semi-official capacity at that time. Almost everybody I interacted in Chinese government and the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. They admired Indian higher education.
Yes.
Because from a distance, they saw the branding of IITs, IIMs, and that's what was higher education with them. And the chief executives in American companies, Indian technocrats and all that. And of course, we would maintain a discreet silence because we don't want to badmouth our own country, foreign soil, least of all China. What they have done then is, because they have the economic muscle, because the school education foundations are very strong, A, they encouraged their brightest youngsters to go abroad and study. B, once they studied, they invited them back with handsome remunerations to be a part of the education system, higher education system. They also invited foreigners, the reputed academics and universities all over the world at very good salaries. They brought them here. They gave special support to research. And because in China, when you say something, you're serious about it.
Yes.
We also talk about research. Maybe that's an area where a certain culture and maybe some degree of authoritarianism and accountability also help. And therefore, really, today China, if you notice, in terms of research, papers published, patenting, they're next only to the United States. In terms of universities quality, next only to the United States. It was unthinkable 20, 30 years ago. But the key I would still say is the foundation is school education, because in India, I would maintain that the top 10-15%, because the families are driven, parents are educated, they can afford some money, they are finding their own means. It's not the best way of doing it, but they are somehow figuring out. The real tragedy of India is not including the 80% at the bottom. They are not partners in economic growth. Therefore, the first priority in my book is not merely excellence at the top, but it's actually inclusion at the bottom. And that bottom is very big bottom, 80%. If you do that as a first thing, higher education, if you adopt the best practices from the rest of the world, and also encourage the best universities in the world to establish shop here at a lower cost, modest cost, if they improve the quality of education, then our middle classes, they love education. And if the degree in this country has actually a lot of meaning in terms of skill promotion, then they will go and because Indians are now spending, if I'm not mistaken, about $40 billion, or 40 to 45, $50 billion, some estimates say $50, $60 billion in America alone on higher education annually. Now, if a substantial part of the money comes to India, money is not the issue. Just ensure that money and quality come together. That means, and a great higher education institution cannot be built overnight. It's not a building on the land. It is a culture and the scholarship. And that can only happen with the existing outstanding universities across the world. Bring them here. Don't be embarrassed. And our own great scholars abroad, encourage them. A Venki Ramakrishnan or somebody else, we must worship them and say, look, you are the czar of education, please take care of it. He's a blank check. You please, all we want is outcomes in India to stand up there. We're not doing that. We still have the rigid, bureaucratic, old-fashioned, controlling approach, which has been a colossal failure.
Right. And if we're talking about learning from China, another thing I think we can use China as a model for is the local governance in small town levels. And like you rightfully mentioned, we always mention in this conversation as well, how the local governance in India can be seen as the weakest section in the entire world in comparison. So what do you think China is getting right in that sense? And what do you think India is getting wrong in the same regard?
I don't know about the evolution of local governments in China, whether it's Mao Zedong's doing because the communes and the Communist Party cadres were always important in his frame of reference, or is it specially given an institutional shape in the post-reform era, since 1970, a Deng Xiaoping era. I'm not very sure about that. Maybe we can do some research and find out what happened. But somehow they got it right. They discovered that while the policy is shaped at the national level, particularly in a homogeneous country like China, relatively homogeneous, though a big country, 85% Han Chinese, practically everybody speaking Mandarin language. And there's not much of a diversity in that sense in the country. So much easier. And of course, authoritarian Communist Party. What they did is they mastered the art of providing leadership at the national level. Meritocratic, technocratic leadership at the top consistently. Every member of the Chinese Politburo is a technocrat. Every member is a very well-tried, tested human being, not because he's son of so-and-so. They've been tried in a city or a town or a county and then a province, or they go in a sector, they delivered, and then they reach the top level. And at the bottom, while the policy is framed by the top, the actual decision-making locally in keeping with the policy and execution entirely left to the local governments. And they created a beautiful design where local governments are competing for investment and economic growth. That incentive is going, because if you generate investment and economic growth in your county, you are promoted as the leader. So now there is actually an incentive, not only incentive for the country or my county, but for me, for my career advancement. So given that, local governments work beautifully. 51% of all the government expenditure is at the local level. Whereas in India, about 32-33% is at the national level, about 60+% is at the state level, about 3% is at the local level. It's ridiculous. Now, the reason why local governments alone will work, particularly in a democracy, is democracy acquires meaning, as we discussed earlier, only when there's local government. To give a simple example, if I live in an apartment or in a housing colony, I understand the road, I understand the sewerage, I understand the drinking water, I understand the street lighting, I understand the parking, I understand the elevator functioning. If I choose Pallavi as my leader, I expect these things to be fixed. I'm not talking about some grand national things which I don't understand or don't impact my life in a direct way. These are real things that impact me every day. So I know what to measure your performance by. And I know you and you alone are accountable. Then democracy works, because you have to earn my favor. You have to get my vote and my support. And if you don't measure up to it, I use my vote as a tool to change things. I'll go for Akshat. That's how democracy really works. We made democracy into a highfalutin big thing about Bharat Mata. Democracy is here at the grassroots. That was our fundamental, foundational blunder we committed. We have not yet addressed it. Because we were afraid of casteism and caste domination and hierarchies in villages, quite rightly. The answer to that is enlarge the local government unit. Don't allow the local traditional village to be the unit. Make a bigger unit. Make a county or something. Make a 50,000 population, 30,000 population. So that your traditional divides of caste, etc., will not be relevant at all. Like in Assembly constituency, Lok Sabha. They're there, but they're not that relevant, right? That should have been done. And that failure of imagination cost the country very dearly. And even now, we are not looking at that, except in the state of Kerala.
Right. Coming to Kerala, why do you think Kerala has started putting in that effort of decentralization at the grassroots level? And do you think the neighboring states or nationwide, do you think Kerala is doing something that the rest of the states can learn from?
To the second part of the question, the answer is absolutely yes. But one caveat is we created a very rigid constitutional framework. Not only did the constitutional amendment not empower local governments, it also made it difficult to empower local governments by very rigid one-shoe-fits-all framework. So a bit more of, at least that much, if they say the structure of local government is entirely yours, each state, but you should automatically give them adequate resources and authority and make them accountable. If that much is there, then things will happen. Now to the first part, why Kerala things seem to be improving. Again, I think we should ask experts who understand Kerala society much better. But there are several things over the past century. It's not one day's affair. Narayana Guru was the first great reformer of Kerala who transformed Kerala society during his lifetime. So the culture of inquiry, a spirit of rationalism, a spirit of local democracy and empowerment was integral to Kerala society for the past 100 years. Second, because of that spirit, that background, the politics and elections, while they are robust and a lot of very loud and noisy and a lot of debate and discussion, very argumentative, as Amartya Sen says, they were not driven by the feudal impulse for power as is normally the case, let's say, in Andhra Pradesh or Telangana. It's not about me somehow getting into that position. Nothing else matters. So the purpose of power is much better understood by the electorate. Now, because of that, the two major formations, LDF and UDF, is an impressive consensus. Actually, must be given full credit. Normally, in a country where if one group or one party does something, the other party, I don't care what it is, I say no. We're right now witnessing in much of India, the national level and state level. But in Kerala, on this issue, they came together totally. So it's not merely one government doing it one day. They made it a sustainable model. And several civil servants of great caliber. That's why one man with conviction is a majority. In any capacity, civil service or politics, if even a few people really are driven by the passion for public purpose and they have the ability, you can bring about significant changes. So a few civil servants, notably Vijayanand and others, they did a very credible job over a sustained period, and they were allowed to do a credible job. Irrespective of the change of governments at the top, at the state level, they held the same office for years. So they could actually institutionalize and sustain them. So it's a function of many things. While we cannot replicate Kerala society in Andhra, Telangana, or Tamil Nadu overnight, you can certainly replicate many of the practices with such local improvements as are necessary.
So I think Pallavi brought up China. So I think we'll move to China now. And so to start off, there was a resumption of flights between India and China after a gap of 5 years. Even I think PM Modi and the Chinese premier shared the world stage on a couple of occasions. So do you think this is an actual long-term restructuring of ties, or is it a sort of knee-jerk response to global headwinds?
I think it's a mature response. Both countries, while we have our problems, we're also ancient. We also have great respect for each other because these are two great civilizations for 5,000 years. These are the only two continuing civilizations for 5,000 years in the world. And China has done some remarkable things. India has done some remarkable things given our diversity and complexity. And there's a lot we can learn from each other and respect each other. As they say, you can choose your friends. You cannot choose your neighbors. You like it or not, you cannot ignore a neighbor as big and as powerful as China. Even if China were not a neighbor, you cannot ignore China now. Right? Rest of the world, Europe is not China's neighbor. Is Europe ignoring China? Is America ignoring China? And when you're a neighbor, where is the question? So we have to find an arrangement which is mutually beneficial. At the same time, we must be wary. We must be on our guard. Because China has time and again, it is Chinese establishment has time and again showed that they are willing to needle us whenever it suits their purpose. Now, we cannot defeat China. Probably America also cannot defeat China. That's not the objective. But if we are capable of inflicting a significant amount of pain relative to what China wants to get out of a skirmish, I think that will be a safeguard. I think we are probably there and we must continue to maintain that level.
Yeah. So unlike India's relationship with China, a country that has been our long-standing ally, and talking about friends, Russia, right? So the question of Russian oil imports becomes important because India has continued purchasing Russian oil. It has argued that this is in our national interest and it is in the interest of our energy security in a very changing global order, I would say. So how should we see this relationship today, and how to look at it how does it look in the coming future years?
First of all, we desperately need Russian oil is not the correct argument. Oil has no color. All oil is the same, with minor variations. There are some chemical composition, calorific value, minor differences there, but oil is the same. Whether buy from Saudi Arabia or Iran or Venezuela or Oman or Russia, it makes no difference. It is more about strategic autonomy and more about the way, in a peremptory manner, in a humiliating manner, the American president declared penal tariffs. Because in a country of India's stature and potential, cannot simply be a submissive sycophant. So oil is, I can buy oil anywhere in the world. So, and if the West does not understand, if America does not understand, if country after country, the oil is not in the market, you impose sanctions against Russia, impose sanctions against Iran, impose sanctions against Venezuela, you are cutting the nose to spite the face. Because those countries may suffer. But if 15-20% of the global oil production is out of the market, oil price will shoot up dramatically. And everybody, including America, and definitely India, will be hurt because we import among large countries probably the greatest amount of oil in the world as a percentage. Even China has greater self-reliance. Japan is the only other country which imports proportionately largest amount of oil. But Japan is in a different league altogether, and the quantity they import is smaller than us. So India cannot afford that. The prices go up. So the problem is not Russian oil. The problem is that we need oil in the market adequately so that the price does not shoot up. And the West also needs it. And the paradox of this whole oil penal tariffs is, if America's avowed objective is to contain China's rise, America is guaranteeing that the China will benefit from all this. Because if India also does not buy it, who will buy it? China. Next door neighbor, the direct pipeline as well as shipping routes available. And China is much less concerned about America and American attitude because China is now reached a stage where they make others vulnerable, they are not vulnerable. And you make China's oil even cheaper, or Russian oil to China even cheaper. So it's not well thought out. So it is more about that, and hopefully that will be set right, because Trump himself publicly stated that India is hardly buying anything, therefore we'll remove the things. I don't know what is happening inside. You and I don't have any insider knowledge. Let's hope that very quickly the tariff issue will be sorted out. But let me reiterate, there's no reason why we should buy only Russian oil. There's a good reason why we should not simply submit and surrender with a white flag just because the mighty President of the United States says you must stop buying or something.
So we will continue this conversation. The light is giving up here. We'll talk about more on Trump. We'll talk more on all of these things in India as well. But we'll have a change of setting as of now. Yeah, so as you can see, there is disruption in the setting that we're sitting in now, because we also want to talk about one of the main causes of disruption that's been here. That's the guy this year, right? But before we go to the guy, or what the economists call the agent of chaos, but we're talking about China, we're talking about Russia, sir. And I want to understand, I want to go to the history books. I want to understand the non-alignment movement, right? The future of it, because now it seems the world is really unipolar, bipolar. That discussion is going on. How do you see non-alignment movement in today's world?
The particular words may change because non-alignment was a concept in two contexts. One is post-colonial. We generally, the post-colonial societies had a grouse that the West controlled us, dominated us for a long time. Therefore, we had no reason to pick sides. And two, when there was a existential battle fought between these two nuclear-powered alliances, and with the potential nuclear decimation on the cards, because that was the real fear. Take Cuban Missile Crisis, take many other extremely potentially fatal, globally speaking, fatal events and circumstances. So in that context, we didn't want to pick sides. So non-alignment, it was a negative connotation. But the truth is, because of our own post-colonial and colonial history, because of the power of the communist movements in many of these countries, politically they were significant. While we officially were non-aligned, I think most of these countries were a little closer to the Soviet bloc than they were to the American bloc. It was not true with all countries. Pakistan, for instance, clearly was a part of CENTO and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, they generally did not want to officially pick sides. Now it's more complicated. The world at the time, however cataclysmic it appeared on occasion, was actually pretty clear. Economic freedom, market competition, political freedom. Means of production being controlled by the state, therefore no individual economic freedom. Monopoly, no market competition, and a single party rule. So a very clear polarity. Whereas today, even to pick sides, what exactly are we picking? China is a one-party state with a fiercely dedicated capitalist market economy. A country which was isolationist for a long time, almost like North Korea today, is now the greatest champion of global trade. America, which was at one time the bastion of liberty and free trade, is now violently opposed to free trade. So now we have a much more chaotic situation. Even if you want to pick sides, it doesn't make sense. So therefore now it's a recognition that the world is much more complicated. It's not clearly divided into two camps. A recognition that increasingly each one is out for himself as a nation. A recognition that multiple poles are now emerging. China, India hopes to be there eventually. Already it's of significant value and so on and so forth. And a recognition that our national interest demands that we have some kind of negotiated settlement with each of these players. Therefore, I think in the Indian context, the expression we use, the strategic autonomy. And many other countries in different languages are doing the same thing. Take Europe, for instance. It's part of NATO. But they don't even know where NATO is going right now. And they find themselves in some kind of a quandary in dealing with Ukraine. While they are wary of China, they want to also have a relationship with China because of economic and trade linkages and so on and so forth. So if even a very loyal ally of the United States, the European community, is now trying to hedge its bets, where is the question of the rest of the world being this side or that side? So I think now, at least from the Indian context, the expression best suits the occasion is strategic autonomy. We don't pick sides, and we're willing to negotiate with everybody as far as practicable. So the words may change, but also the context has changed quite a bit.
So I think now it's time to bring into the conversation the agent of chaos that Aditya referred to. So Henry Kissinger once famously quipped, "It may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal." Do you think this? do you think this line has a whole new meaning in the Trump era, sir?
That probably in a particularly introspective moment, Kissinger said that it's not fair. You see, it's a fact that America, because of its exuberant advocacy of a freedom of a certain kind, has sometimes become quite inimical to the interests of their own allies. Whereas European countries with the colonial experience, they were much more nuanced in their approach about religion, about democracy, about societies and cultures. They understood much better. So where they say angels fear to tread, America entered and then sometimes created a problems for itself. But it's unfair to characterize that America has been fatal to its friends. Take Japan. Defeated in the Second World War, suffered the only nuclear weapons ever deployed against a human population. And who was the country which helped them most in terms of technology, investment and markets? United States. Take South Korea after the Korean War. You see now where North Korea is, where South Korea is. How did South Korea become what it is today? Entirely United States generosity. Just because we see what's happening today in the Trumpian United States, to characterize US as fatal to the friends is a very, very ahistoric approach. Take Singapore, take Taiwan, take much of Southeast Asia, take even India. Despite our low-hot, low-cold relationship, PL 480 was a lifesaver for us. Without that, probably millions would have starved to death. Ultimately, Mrs. Gandhi decided, and people like C. Subramaniam did a fabulous job, and India could at least produce enough food grains to be self-sufficient. But until that time, without American ships landing in India, we didn't have food. So we used to call it ship to mouth. So America has got a very unsavory reputation because of its immaturity and because of its, what shall I say, they were never speaking with one voice. American Congress one thing, State Department another, the Pentagon another, the White House another. So because of that, it's easy to characterize America as sometimes evil or sometimes fatal to the friends. But America has been a benevolent country in the post-Second World War world. I know it's an unfashionable statement to make. Take even Europe itself, Germany itself and the rest of Europe. After the Second World War, the winners like the Allied powers, Britain and others, and the loser like Germany, they were all decimated. So the winner, loser on paper. Really the whole of European continent was exhausted, innervated. But who pulled them up with Marshall Plan, etc.? So that enlightened self-interest, that willingness to share technology, investment, and provide markets, America consistently did, and whoever benefited from that, whoever was smart enough to take advantage of this, they prospered. But America also made monumental political misjudgments out of a sense of black and white. Much of the world is grey, with long history, culture, and very complex political climate. A lot of things are grey. It's not clearly right and wrong. America never understood, because America still is a young country, not yet a mature country. It's just, remember, just 300 years old. In terms of the Constitution, it's only 250 years old. Not Declaration of Independence. Next year, they'll celebrate the 250th anniversary of Declaration of Independence. Whereas these countries have a 1,000-year history, 2,000-year history, a much greater, much more nuanced approach.
So much like this conversation, how do most conversations around the world about, say, the global order always circle back to the United States of America or its president, or in this case, Mr. Trump? Why is it so central?
Until about 1920s, Britain was still the superpower. But since 20s, British domination declined, America became a superpower because of sheer economic might, technological prowess, innovation, and inviting climate for the best talent in the world. And of course, a country with abundant natural resources. Now, historically, what is interesting is, when America was colonized, the Northern America, the America that we know, and Canada, they were not very attractive. The attractive parts were Mexico and Latin America, Peru and Brazil and Argentina and so on and so forth. And they were the big powers. They were the countries with an excellent climate and economic opportunity. Whereas America, the British landed there because they lost everywhere else in the American continent. It's the Spanish and others who took over. So British had no choice. They went there by default. It was regarded as a barren, cold desert where you can't even raise crops. And that's why the first few groups of pilgrims, they died in large numbers of starvation. And when they had, for the first time, a proper harvest, that's when Thanksgiving started. So what was an inhospitable continent from climate point of view and food production point of view, it's the genius of the American pilgrims and their institutions. They made it into such a great country. There's no question about it. And last 100 years, in particular last 100 years, America has been the preeminent power in the world. After Second World War, there's not even a ghost of a competition. Now, will that remain for the next 100 years? Probably America will still be a very significantly important country, but China is more or less emerging as an equal power in the next 20 years. If not equal already, it's almost equal. But in the next 20 years, it will be almost an equal power. And probably next 30, 40 years later, India will be also in that company. So let's see how things shape up.
Sir, would you say this great power that America has, do you think it defines its jurisdiction when it comes to external conflicts? Say, for instance, the Gaza peace accord that was put forward by USA as the negotiator. What do you think USA's jurisdiction is there? Like, is it the function of the power that they have, or is it the credibility, or is it just the lack of another alternative?
Well, we look at it from another point. Let's assume US does not play that role, whether it's Gaza or Ukraine or some other conflict. Can you imagine some kind of a meaningful dialogue and some kind of a resolution peacefully anywhere in the world? Somebody has to play that role. Otherwise, nation states, too much of government, too much of pride, too much of politicization. You have to appeal to die-hard nationalists in your country. Too much of emotion and sentiment. So somebody has to play that role. United Nations, by definition, cannot, because it's more a talking shop. It's not a sovereign entity with its own power, economic power or military power. It's more an opportunity to sort of negotiate and figure out how to build a consensus. So by default, it falls on the country with the greatest economic and military might and linkages throughout the world. But even more than that, the general trust and confidence in that country's ability to navigate through this minefield. And by and large, US has been trying to play that role, though we call them like the American. They took the blame for a lot of things. But a world where there is no reasonably competent and well-respected umpire to bring some order will not be a happy world. In fact, some of the turbulence that we see in the world today is America is giving up that role, whether it's World Trade Agreement or about global peace and order or maintaining a certain balance of power without disrupting the way things are. America is simply saying, look, why am I bothered? Why am I burdened with all this? You take care of yourselves. The world is topsy-turvy. So while we all love to hate America, we all love to hate a powerful person. It's human nature, right? It will be a very sad world if nobody takes that responsibility. Only thing is, probably it will be a collective responsibility. Like, how do you keep the shipping routes open? It has to be collective. No country can bear that responsibility. How do you make sure that oil, as long as fossil fuels are required, oil trade is available to everybody and there's no blockade and things like that? These are real things. They could cause devastation to humanity. And unless the big powers take that responsibility, one day India also has to play that role. For instance, in the Houthis context, India actually sent the biggest, I wouldn't call it armada, but biggest contingent of warships. 10 warships went there to help the process, except that we did not, as a country, attack the Houthis. We actually protected the shipping route. So the countries have to take responsibility. And the country which is best placed to take that responsibility, militarily, economically, and in terms of the global linkages, is the United States. So probably it will be eventually replaced by a collective kind of a security where United States, China, to some extent India, and some of the other powers will take responsibility depending on the geography. And they'll have some rules of engagement and certain basic agreement on when to intervene in what manner. Until that time, there's no escape from Pax Americana.
Yeah. So coming from that, we've talked a little bit about it, but there were high and aggressive tariffs that US imposed. So my question is twofold here. So one is that, has this been a disruptor of global trade, considering the position of US dollar, like it holds, it's such a strong currency and most of the global trade happens. And second fold is that there were a cumulative of 50% tariffs that were imposed on India. So what does it mean for Indian export and, the manufacturing ambition and the overall trade strategy of our country?
First of all, United States inflicted this wound on the world and itself quite unnecessarily. Among all the big powers, US imports are among the lowest as a share of GDP. They're only about 12 to 15% of GDP. India has a higher share of imports as a share of GDP, and with the currency which is not ours. China has a higher share of imports. We all know about Chinese exports. So, first of all, a manufactured crisis is driving this in the perception of the president and his support group, the MAGA Republicans or whatever. Second, American economy is doing pretty well. By developed country standards, theirs is the fastest growing, the best economy. Again, they're pretending there's a crisis and therefore actually trying to create a crisis. That is the paradox of it. So it's bad not only for the world, it's also bad for the domestic things. But let's not overstate this. While it is disruptive, it is completely counter to what we have experienced in the last 30, 40 years, the WTO regime, global trade, etc. But if you take the totality of global trade, it is still $35 trillion. It has not declined. It is probably not growing as fast as it could otherwise. And there is a needless barrier created, some uncertainty created. But as of now, touch wood, it is more a psychological problem than a real trade barrier as of now, if you take the totality. And I hope wiser counsels will prevail very quickly and this will change. Now, having said that, there is a larger issue. For about 2 centuries, the world believed that trade is good for the exporting nation and the importing nation. Everybody prospers. some part of the American establishment is now coming on to the point of view it's a zero-sum game. It's not a win-win situation. It's not a very happy thing. Because American experience itself shows that trade actually can be win-win. And yet, in a political environment, in a democracy, there are actually some losers with trade. Because when your goods are not competitive price-wise, for a variety of reasons, then import becomes inevitable. Therefore, the producer of those goods will suffer. When they have electoral clout, sometimes disproportionate to their numbers, given the American electoral system, because their system is winner take all in each state. And a few states are the swing states. 7-8 states matter. If in those states, a significant number of voters are actuated by this impulse, then they have an outsized influence way beyond what is rational. I think that's what's happening in the United States. It's not really philosophy, it's politics. Politics of a unique kind given the American context. Now, unless American leadership has the ability to persuade its people and find alternative things, because in creative destruction, sometimes you lose. As a country, you may gain, but some sections lose. The answer lies not in preventing global trade, but in creating conditions for the others to have a better form of livelihood. That's an obvious solution. Meanwhile, the world has to grapple with this problem for the time being, but I believe ultimately the global supply chains are so integrated. Our collective welfare and consumerism is so firmly installed in our minds and in our economies that there will be some interruptions, but there will not be any fatal change. I'm pretty confident about that because Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage broadly still holds good. But obviously, nations that are manipulating currencies, and China is accused of that, nations that are driving down the prices in all the importing countries and therefore making their production unviable in the market, they have to rethink and focus more on indigenous markets, stimulating their own markets, and be a little more careful about the mercantile approach. But Trump also is conditioned by another political hero of his, McKinley. William McKinley was the president between 1897 and 1901. McKinley believed in high tariffs, and at that particular time, high tariffs actually worked in America's favor. He believed in bullying all the particularly the Latin American countries and controlling them. It was he who engineered the Spanish War. That is what led to Cuba's liberation. It is that war also led to Philippines' liberation, which America controlled until 1945. It became America's protectorate. If I'm not mistaken, even Puerto Rico, I think, was liberated at the time, became America's territory, though not a state. So, Trump, in his inaugural address, second time, openly talked about McKinley being his hero. So, it's politics at an electoral level and the political understanding of Donald Trump about the past history of America in the last century or more. That is what is shaping the attitudes. But ultimately, they have to find solutions within American society about healthcare, about opportunity for everybody, because the people with skills and better education are doing extremely well. That's true all over the world. While overall all boats are rising with rising tide, the people with skills and contact and capital, they are doing so much better than the rest of the population. In America, that contrast is very stark, and they have to grapple with that. In the modern technology age, the inequalities are rising even as prosperity is actually increasing everywhere. That is a central issue, and that can't be addressed by global trade problems. In fact, Trump is only strengthening China. China is appearing to be a very moderate, very balanced, very mature nation, acceptable. Earlier, people worried about China, whereas now China becomes very much more acceptable, and the world is embracing China. So Trump is actually running counter to his own national interest.
So just a follow-up about India, sir. So how has this impacted the overall trade policy of India? Has it led India to diversify in some sense?
Obviously, it is. Yesterday, we talked about Oman thing. Britain we already had, Australia, European Union we're trying very hard. And this year, while we suffered with American trade policies, definitely because we have the highest tariff, unfortunately, with the big countries, But this diversification at least ensure that there is no real fall in the exports. Though the rise in exports would have been much greater. The growth rate is not good, but at least it's not devastating for us. Partly increase in domestic demand, partly our economic strength as a country because of fiscal policies of the last 10 years, partly because of export diversification, we are able to withstand these global headwinds. But there's no substitute America as a market. Let's be truthful. Ultimately, if we deny ourselves American market access, we will suffer by way of maybe 1 or 2 percentage points GDP declining. And a decline of GDP by 1 or 2 percentage points is a phenomenal number. It's not just 1 or 2%, just because it's a single digit thing. In terms of consequences to our economy and long-term growth and our employment, it's a phenomenal loss. So we have to ultimately make peace. It's in the interest of the United States, in the interest of India. I'm reasonably confident that will happen in the next few days to weeks.
So I just want a quick response on this before we can move on to the rule of law in India. This year, America also saw something as Doge, right? Many arms of Doge, right? So we talk about global trade. Trump also was very, very strict on free flow of labor, for that matter, which is people going, migration, and all of that. Rule of law as a framework is something which is very, very fundamental to American democracy. Do you think it's still there?
Yes, but tottering a little bit. Because still America is governed by rule of law. Even Trump, remember, when the court gave categorical directions, he never violated that. He's fighting as hard as possible to expand the power of the presidency. But he's not violating the fundamental tenets of American democracy or the Constitution. Because American society probably will not tolerate. And recently, if you notice, American Congress is slowly pushing back. Even the Republican Party is slowly shedding the fear of Trump, because Trump put the fear of God into all Republicans by saying, if you oppose me on any issue, I will have a primary election against you and I'll support your opponent. But that fear also they're losing. So slowly, American institutions are recapturing their glory and trying to put the president, or at least hold the president to account. That's the way the system is designed. The competition, zealously they got their turf, and separation of powers. I think that's beginning to work.
Yeah. So, sir, in this conversation, I think we have talked about a certain absence of rule of law, especially in India. And so, since rule of law is how, people experience, bureaucracy every day in some sense. So, in India, a failure of rule of law, is it a failure of institutions or a failure of bureaucratic functioning in some sense?
Actually, it's two things. One is a feudal notion of power. Remember, while we had experience with democracy 2,500 years ago, even Buddha's time, and about 1,000 years ago, Chola's time, very famed local governments, etc. The last 1,000 years, we hardly had any self-governing experience. It's a very new thing for us. In the face of that, the notion of power is individual and personalized. What I think some scholars call Oriental despotism. It's a bit racist, that expression, but basically a country that's not used to the barbarian concept of power, being exercised for the public good, rule-bound, and non-discretionary. These are all the ideals of bureaucracy or exercise of power. While they're there on paper, they're still not embraced by a society. Otherwise, there would not be such a clamor to be an MLA or an MP or without any purpose. Why? Because they think that power is personal, feudal. You convert that into private gain, which is normal, natural. So you and I are outraged about this abuse of power for personal gain. But in society at large, it's almost like, that's the way it happens. You and I are outraged about a family perpetuating power in public office. Society at large, they think it's normal. If you actually oppose a scion of a family in elections, people are probably more likely to vote for that member of the family rather than you. That only means that the notion of democracy, as it should be, has not yet penetrated our minds, exercise of power. That could have been and should have been countered by institutions. We failed to build them right from the beginning. Police, even today, police are under the control of the political executive. They transfers, postings, including crime investigation. Forensics. Even today, forensics are very weak in the country. I can give you chapter and verse, numbers, but that's not necessary. Oftentimes, the evidence gathering is by brutally assaulting the person, just subjecting the accused to third degree, and extracting a confession when he is poor and helpless without any proper legal help or something. That's not rule of law. Prosecution is incredibly weak in this country. The number of prosecutors, the quality of prosecutors is unbelievably bad, incredibly weak. The procedures are dilatory and ridiculous. And despite all the efforts made in making laws and changing laws, we haven't really addressed that challenge. And the judiciary, both at the trial court level and at the constitutional court level, huge reform is required. So it's not one simple step. There is no silver bullet. There are several things systematically to be done. It will probably take several years, maybe a decade or two. If you start today, 1, 2, 3, 4, you have to do it. We are not investing any kind of energy. Even the recent effort to amend the CRPC and IPC, etc. Well, much is made out of it. It could have been a fantastic opportunity to fundamentally change the rule of law framework in the country. And we have enormous amount of evidence, a wealth of evidence and expert advice. Vajpayee government constituted a Malimat committee about the criminal law. And they gave a superb report. Though it's the same party of the composition NDA today, they did not even, to the best of my understanding, did not even utilize the expertise of Malimat committee. So hodgepodge a bit, a few good things are there, but it simply is nowhere near what is adequate. So we require the measured, deep, thoughtful, expert-driven, evidence-driven approach to reform in our criminal justice system and in our rule of law framework.
So, to sort of take a step back from the institutional aspect of it, coming to a citizen-centric aspect, one of the most significant ways how the failure of rule of law manifests in India are, say, stampades or road accidents. So, let's talking about stampades first. Incidents like Mahakumbh, etc., these have caused significant losses of lives in our country. And in, say, other countries where rule of law is actually succeeding, there is some sort of accountability being taken for accidents like this. Why is that not happening in India?
Stampede is a unique thing. I don't think we can really come to general conclusions on the basis of stampedes. The other day, in one of the European countries, if I'm not mistaken, there was a stampede and death of several people. I don't remember which country. The papers carried in the last fortnight or last month. So stampede is a function of large crowds gathering. They may not be hostile crowds. They may not be violent crowds, but you get religious frenzy or some celebrity event or a cultural festival, large crowds gathering and without adequate precautions. India is a country of crowds. Our religious gatherings are unbelievable. I think the rest of the world together cannot match that. If we take the crowds that gathered in a period of 45 days or so for the Prayagraj Kumbh Mela, something like 64 crore people, 640 million people. That 640 million people could gather at one place in 45 days is something that's impossible to comprehend anywhere else in the world. Your Ayodhya temple, I believe, now gets about 2.5 lakh to 4 lakh visitors a day. Earlier, Tirumala used to get about 80,000, 1 lakh per day on average. We thought it was a world record. Now, Ayodhya is now an unbelievable number. Varanasi gets, I believe, about 1.5 to 2.5 lakh people a day. So large crowds, particularly religious occasions, sometimes even other occasions like, the Tamil Nadu political gathering of a film star or something. In fact, for us, religion, politics and cricket are all the same. They're our religion. So large crowds in these occasions have become endemic. Now, religious gatherings we cannot easily regulate. You can make all precautions, and I think they're doing their best. And sometimes they fail. After all, in a situation where overall governance is definitely not as good as it should be, nor is the state capacity as good as it should be, somewhere or other there's going to be a problem when such large crowds gather. But it's much more unforgivable for political gatherings and sports gatherings, because that's much more predictable. The numbers also are not on that scale. So some amount of casualness on the part of the police probably the cause. So in general, I would not like to use Stampede as an example of either governance failure or rule of law deficit, because it is happening on occasion elsewhere in the world also. It should not happen. But it's also the propensity of large numbers to go. So my advice to people would be, please avoid large crowds, including my own children. When a concert is there, some global icon comes, they want to go to Mumbai or some other place, I'm terrified. I'm terrified. No, the moment there are 50,000, 100,000 people in a frenzy, you never know. And we don't have the systems or the infrastructure to handle those crowds. So I think all young people, I plead with you. You have television now, you have a live telecast, a live streaming and all kinds of stuff. Why do you want to subject yourself to this, paying so much of money and then subjecting yourself to so much of inconvenience and potential danger?
Sir, but if we're talking about potential danger, just road accidents, there's approximately 250 deaths per day in India due to road accidents. So if it's potential danger to just step out of your house and go onto the road in
That is
India.
a real issue. This is a governance issue. Whereas Stampede, etc. cannot be classified as a governance issue. It's more complicated. Road accidents, India is the road accident king. We probably are losing more than 1 lakh people in a year, the highest number in the world, or close to the highest number in the world. We are losing at least about 5 times that number are getting severely injured, fractures and sometimes paralysis and all kinds of things. The number of road accidents per unit number of cars is among the highest in the world. The number of road accidents per kilometers traveled in traffic among the highest in the world. And per number of accidents, the fatalities are among the highest in the world. So at every level, we're not giving enough relevance to human life. We're not protecting human life. The first and most important thing is traffic management. Hyderabad city alone is losing about 5 people a day. The city traffic, not highways. The city alone, about 1,800 to 2,000 people are dying in Hyderabad, Cyberabad and Rachakonda commissionerates. And about 10 times that number are getting seriously wounded. It's a disgrace. And we have the infrastructure. We have the legal power. We don't have any problem except the will and the skill to manage it. It's not a resource problem. Take Hyderabad city, the metro, for instance. It only carries about 4.5 lakh people. We spend 22,000 crores. We can carry maybe 10-15 lakhs if only increase the frequency. After spending 22,000 crores, we don't have the will or the wisdom to spend 300 crores to buy a few more coaches to increase the frequency with the same infrastructure. Nothing more is required. It's a colossal failure of governance, misallocation of resources. Without quality public transport, you cannot improve city traffic. Private vehicles, no matter how many flyovers you have, that's not the answer at all. I'm not opposed to flyovers. I'm not opposed to better infrastructure. But world over, we have seen, without quality and integrated public transport with last mile connectivity, predictable, safe, and convenient, you can never reduce congestion in cities. Take a city like, for instance, Delhi in our own country. Delhi has 3.3 crore population. Delhi has fewer vehicles, personal automobiles, than Hyderabad city, with 1/3 of its population. Because Delhi has much better public transport. It's not good enough by global standards, but I'm just comparing Hyderabad and Delhi. Take Mumbai. Mumbai is infinitely richer than Hyderabad, and Mumbai is much bigger than Hyderabad. The automobiles, private automobiles, are fewer in Mumbai than in Hyderabad. If you take per 100 population, how many trips by public transport are available? Hyderabad probably accounts for 25%, 25 per 100 population. I think Mumbai is somewhere near 50, 55. So is the case in Delhi. In case of London, it's about 100. In case of Singapore, it's about 120. So, quality public transport, utilizing existing infrastructure, increasing the frequency, and ensuring last mile connectivity, ensuring a single authority so that unified thing is there, coordinating rather than working in separate silos, and enforcing traffic rules. Even if you can't invest much money, certainly you require more investment of money, footpaths, many other things. Even if we can't do all thoughts overnight, but these 3 things can be done today at very low cost. And without that, the quality of life in cities is becoming massive. Today we went out into the outskirts of Hyderabad, into the farms. It was so pleasant. No congestion. No 2.5 micron particles. No allergies. No respiratory problems. We really breathe the fresh air. Now, unless the quality of life is commensurate with economic growth, what is the meaning of growth? Growth on paper for bank balance, for your stock value? If the quality of life is not improved, if life is miserable, insecure, stressful every day, then it also undermines economic growth and investment eventually, and definitely quality of life is undermined. So we have to focus on our cities, and we have to also ensure the small towns come up. So that economic activity is not only in one big city. Everybody has to flock there and then get into this rat race. So I think there is a very easy agenda available. Unfortunately, in our real estate-driven politics and in our crass governance structure where those in power, they have VIP culture. Roads open up. Lights don't bother them. The police specially guide them. So they are forgetting that there is a huge population which is the basis of our civilization and economy, which is suffering. So we have to address that. That's an essentially governance issue. It's not a culture issue. People may blame it as a culture issue. No. You enforce it, people immediately follow rules. Time and again we have seen that. Culture is not the problem in traffic management. It's just the governance issue. Lazy, incompetent, and corrupt.
So I think I would like to give some more time to the public transport discussion. You talked about solutions, you talked about last mile connectivity, public transport, all of those things. But when a common citizen is stuck in traffic, it does not irk them. They don't realize how problematic that is. Why is it that so? And how can we speak to the common citizen and be like, hey, you need to understand this is not normal. You can't be in 20 minutes traffic.
I would slightly amend that. People care, people are upset, but people also are despaired. See, you express anger when you feel that your anger can change things. When you feel that nothing will change, whether that conclusion is right or wrong, if the perception is, I can't make a difference, then in the good old Indian tradition, if you can't change it, you endure it. So people are enduring it because there is a perception that they don't matter. All we have to do is make them realize that they're entitled to something better. It can be improved, it must be improved, and you matter. If that happens, I'm pretty confident that people will rise, they raise the voice. And I'm also pretty confident that politicians are not idiots. Whatever we think of them, their antennae are very sharp. If they know that the electorate is keen about this, when it's a low-hanging fruit, you can easily accomplish that. The political and bureaucratic system will fall in line. And that's why I think we should really mount a campaign of citizens to make that voice heard in a responsible way. Not Rasta Roko, not causing further traffic stalls, and not asking for the moon, asking for some simple, practical solutions which are affordable, which can be easily implemented. So to me, it's a very easy thing, particularly in a city like Hyderabad, where we have reasonably decent infrastructure. We need more, but even with what we have, we can do a lot better.
So now, in some sense, you could say 2025 did see a lot of conflicts. There's the issue in Gaza, in Ukraine, even closer home in India, there was an attack in Pahalgam, which led to some sort of a conflict. And even in the erstwhile theaters of conflict, say Punjab or Manipur is still burning, but the other states of the Northeast, Ian Rammohan, a former IPS officer, he calls them degenerated insurgency, where say, yes, the active conflict is over, but there is still some remains of that, where you see a drugs issue or issues of political leadership in those states. So, sir, in these theaters, past theaters of conflict, how do you think the relationship between truth and reconciliation is? Is it a harmonious one, or is there always going to be a perpetual sense of unease?
First, about your general assumption that there is a lot of conflict. Evidence shows that it's not true. It is a perception, magnified by the mass media and the social media. Steven Pinker, in his book, I think The Better Angels is the title, Better Angels of Our Nature or Better Angels. He borrowed Lincoln's phrase in that famous speech. He demonstrated emphatically, with compelling evidence, in fact conclusive evidence, that human society has never been more peaceful, more prosperous, more cognizant of human rights and liberties than today. It's hard for us to believe that because what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine or some other place is dominating our mind space. Just because it's dominating our mind space because of the barrage of media does not mean that's the reality. It doesn't mean that the world is a wonderful place. Not at all. It means the world is getting better and better. So first I want everybody to understand this. The world is not getting messed up. The world is not getting destroyed. The world is not getting more violent. The world is not becoming more exploitative or more heinous. No, not true at all. It's getting better. But there's a lot more room to improve. It's not good enough, but it's much better than what it was. Because if your perspective itself is skewed, then your solutions become very messy. Now, having said that, I broadly agree with the degenerative conflicts issue. Remember, India is the most unlikely nation. While there was a cultural thread of unity throughout history, the diversity is such that you have Mongoloid races, you have Australopithecus, you have some other races, all then religious faiths and regions and culture and history and language. In that diversity, we have done an extraordinary job of building a nation. As part of the freedom struggle, that was actually when the main work was done. And post-independence, with all our defects, a lot of good work was done to try and integrate. But it's not yet full. In a country which is home to 18% of the human population and maybe about half the diversity of the world, that process is not yet full. There are pockets where the problem is there. Even in Pakistan, why is there a problem? Balochistan, etc. The nation building is not yet completed. We are doing a better job than Pakistan, that's a different matter, but it's a hard job. Sometimes it takes generations. We must not lose patience, nor should we panic. So I don't believe that there's such an extraordinary problem. The greatest safeguard is that constitutional liberties are available to everybody. You guarantee that. That a political democracy actually works, not for a few who are in power. That rule of law is real. And self-governance at a local level is actually real and meaningful. If these four things are assured, along with education and healthcare that give you both opportunity and dignity and productivity, then it doesn't matter what ethnicity is. Because these are not good enough, the political system is not able to handle it as well as it should. It's doing its best in some respects. So I think you focus on that, and here you do whatever it takes to maintain order and to give them a better the hope for the future. But don't think that there's a cataclysmic thing. There's no need to panic or suddenly becoming very my God, do something very radical, etc. I think it's not called for.
So, as we now wrap up the year around India, and you often quip when we talk for so long, it seems like we've solved all the problems of the world. But now you rightfully mentioned we are in the farms, we are sitting here in a quieter place. You would always want to retire and sort of lead a peaceful life. The question is, sir, then why do we keep trying? And I want your answer on this. I want you to give time to this. Why do we keep trying?
Actually, I'm reading 3 books around the same time now, all on this theme. One is The Big Picture by, I think, Stephen Carroll. The other is David Christian, The Big History. He's the man who coined the expression big history. The third is by another scholar, in a similar way, about the history of the universe, right from Big Bang to today. In the broader context, when you look at this whole universe, trillions upon trillions of stars, not even billions, and an age which is 13.8 billion years, the universe as of now, as we understand now. I was just looking at the numbers. Our fossil fuel age, if you call that the modern age, last 200 years, if you assume that the universe is 13.8 years old, for every billion years you assume 1 year, our fossil fuel age is 6 seconds. This is just one blip. We think this is the universe, this is even humanity. No, this is just one transient phase. Except that history got so accelerated in the last 200-300 years that so much more happened in terms of economic progress, in terms of technological upgradation, in terms of our aspirations, and human society coming together and cooperating on a much larger scale. Now, in that context, if you look at the universe, you parent insignificance. Therefore, the question comes, if it's going to be a cold, lifeless universe, as my daughter asked me at the age of 8, when I introduced her to cosmos and other things, quite unwisely, I suppose, she said, Dad, if the universe is going to be a cold, lifeless one eventually, what's the point of it all? That's not the lesson we should learn. We must be mindful of that. Ultimately, our ego must be submerged. We're not that important. It is just an accident that on this little planet, around this little yellow dwarf called the sun, in one galaxy out of the hundreds of billions of galaxies, we are here. God knows if there's somebody else. I was just thinking the other day, you take the Voyager. It is the farthest object from planet Earth that human beings sent artificially. It was sent in 1971, I think, 54 years now. It's now 24 billion kilometers away. It takes about 18 hours for light to go from here to there. That's nothing compared to the nearest star, which is 4.2 years away. Voyager will take 80,000 years to reach the nearest star, if it actually goes to the nearest star. It is how isolated we are. The fact is we have life here. The fact is we have consciousness here. The fact is we have immense opportunity. The fact is some extraordinary people throughout history, right from Confucius to Buddha to Socrates to others. And particularly in the last 500 years, some extraordinary thinking by scientists and thinkers and philosophers gave us the kind of opportunity which is unlimited to fulfill our potential. We don't know what is in store for us after death, unless you believe in a God and a heaven or hell. I think most people, even if they believe in some kind of a God, are somewhat skeptical about heaven and hell, right? Quite understandably. So we don't know what is there, but we know that here and now the life is there. The Buddha's path. Buddha always said, I don't care if there's a God. I don't know. But I know that there are human beings. I know that there is pain and suffering. I know we can do something to alleviate that. I can know we can make life better without hurting other human beings. I think that's a good enough goal. I don't know if there's any more meaning in life. And we are lucky that we can actually make a difference. Never before did people have this opportunity to make a difference in a relatively short span of time. You see, in the last 30, 40 years, your generation, young people won't even understand what life was like. When I was going in the farmhouse, when I was using the restroom, when I was using the electricity, the refrigerator, we were eating food, I was amazed. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, there was no indoor plumbing in a village. There was no electricity in most homes. When I grew up in a house without electricity. We used kerosene lamps. Refrigerator was unheard of. Maybe we saw it in a movie, I don't remember if we did. A telephone was unknown. And today, how far have we come? So when there is an opportunity, let's maximize human comfort and happiness, prolong productive lives, and reconcile individual pleasure and happiness with collective good. This is well within our control. Now, beyond that, who knows? Who cares? I mean, an asteroid may come and strike us today as it struck 65 million years ago. Right now, we have no power to stop it or do anything. Maybe 100 years later, we can acquire that ability. I don't know. So that's what it is. There's no point thinking too much. So if you expand your horizon to more than a generation or two, you get very confused. If you expand your horizon in terms of actual action, not contemplation, actual action beyond solar family, again you get confused. It's too big, too complex. Let's not worry too much about that. Just do this much. And let's see.
Thank you, sir. I think that's a very powerful note to end this conversation on. It has been absolutely enlightening and a wonderful session. I think we're all walk back much richer for this. And
Wish you all a wonderful 2026 and wish everybody, the viewers and everybody. And next year will be definitely less turbulent than this year. I'm pretty confident about that because this year politically has been a particularly turbulent year. Even Trump, is getting older and wiser.
So just before we end, I would just like to say one quote that Dr. JP really loves himself. So I would also appreciate it. Never doubt that a small group of committed individuals can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So I think, sir, we go into 2026 with this in mind. Thank you.